Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting of Tuesday, February 8th. As this is a committee meeting, there'll be no final decisions made here today. These recommendations from today will be forwarded to Council on February 22nd. We have an in-house council meeting today. All councillors are present except Councillor Seymour Fagan and Councillor Yeo are tuning in electronically, virtually, so we have a full house. Call the meeting to order, and I'll ask for a motion, please, for the adoption of the agenda for today. Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor Dunn. Any comments? Call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Disclosure, any disclosure of pecuniary interest on anything on today's agenda? Seeing none. Deputations, we have one deputation today. Mr. David Webb is going to give us a deputation on future waste disposal options. Welcome, Mr. Webb. Just a reminder, you have 5 minutes, sir, so please go ahead.
All right, great. Thanks very much. Name David Webb. I'm retired. I'm a taxpayer living in Dunsford. And while I'm a member of the Lindsay Ops Landfill Public Review Committee, and the chair of the Growth Management Strategy Task Force. The opinions I'm expressing today are my own and don't reflect a consensus view of either of those committees. First, I want to say that although there are some findings and recommendations in the Dillon report that you're going to talk about later, I think it's a good document and it is meeting the intended objectives. My purpose in being here today is to get you thinking about kind of slowing down on the environmental assessment and spending a bit more time looking deeply at the progressive technologies emerging in waste management, rather than taking the easy route back to our old friend landfill. Council has approved the start of an EA this year using the recommendations in this Dillon report as the start of the terms of reference, meaning that landfill, as this report's preferred option, will be the primary focus of the EA. And I think it's way too early to start the EA, and there are a number of other things we should do before heading down that road. We've got a good deal of time, easily 15 years, and with effort, 24 years before the landfills are all full. And we can spend that time doing the EA and building whatever solution is selected. The world of waste management is very quickly evolving, and the development of alternatives is happening at a great rate. Let's take the time we have to look at the evolving solutions, including the potential for massive reduction through circular economy and greater diversion. Maybe we can pick the brains of some of our students in the Fleming College Waste Management Program. City of Kawartha Lakes has been a leader in modern waste strategies. The bold and difficult move to clear bags was brilliant and proved that taking the hard way is sometimes the best way. We have innovative diversion programs that are working. I think we know that if we took the time and put in the effort, we could expand those diversion programs and others to reduce our need for disposal drastically. My family, for example, tried an experiment this year and started composting, worm farms, and changes in our buying patterns, and we have reduced our waste by over 80% over the last 7 months. Long story short, we should spend a few years accelerating our diversion to extend the landfill life while we do greater due diligence on alternative disposal solutions. Once we've done as much as we think we possibly can, then we can do the EA for a waste option, but that could be more than 8 years from now. As for landfill expansion as the preferred option, this report claims that mass burn is economically and socially worse than expanded landfill. I don't believe that. Durham York Energy has paid back its initial capital outlay in 7 years, reduced its operational cost per ton from $120 to $60 per ton, and they have a facility that's capable of operating for over 95 years. While old style incineration is looked upon by the public as bad, the reality is that modern facilities are cleaner and less disruptive to the community than landfill. The emission standards Durham York meet are the most stringent in the world, and the citizens of Durham and York are fully behind it. It's clean, it's modern, and it reduces costs. The Dillon report mentions the 5 counties Energy from Waste Committee that is trying to convince our surrounding municipalities to partner and create a mass burn facility. They have met with city officials, but nothing has come of it to date, and I'm sure that COVID has slowed that down. I think City of Kawartha Lakes should take a leadership role and help drive that committee. We have lots of years before we need the solution, and the Durham York Energy facility took only 10 years from the start of its EA to putting the first energy on the grid. So we've got lots of time. The report also mentions a number of options that are potentially viable, but are early in their life and possibly in research. Let's take some of up to that 24 years to see how they and others develop. A full EA takes 4 to 9 years or less. So we've got up to 18 years to find and build the solution. With potentially many years to work with, I think that we should take the time, do the due diligence on the options to find the most suitable and progressive option for City of Kawartha Lakes. If we start an EA now with a preferred option of expanded landfill, that will be at the expense of other options at a time when technology is improving vastly. Let's not do the easy thing and continue with the same old and problematic solutions. Landfill is not environmentally friendly. Its effects last for generations after they close, and people just don't like them. The Durham York story is a good news story of reducing cost of waste disposal, generating useful energy, having few environmental issues, and having support of the citizens. I'm looking forward to the public consultations and hope that City of Kawartha Lakes can get the community strongly involved. It's an opportunity for City of Kawartha Lakes to be a leader. I would strongly suggest not using the term preferred option in this Dillon report until after public consultations. Let's defer the environmental assessment, take some bold and courageous diversion steps, establish a formal project with the 5 counties Energy from Waste Committee, and stay in tune with the state of waste technology. If nothing comes out of this work over the next few years, then we can still fall back on our old standby landfill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Webb. Appreciate that. I'm just gonna ask for a motion to receive the deputation and the correspondence that was provided with it, and we'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Vail and O'Reilly, are there any questions for the deputant on the deputation? Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor, to David. Thanks for your presentation today. Are you from? You used the Durham York experiment or situation. Are you familiar with many other municipalities in the province of Ontario that are either exploring that or doing early stages of doing that? That would be something comparable to our size.
Something comparable to our size. Well, the size with the 5 counties. And the 5 counties would account for something like the same amount of waste that's going through the Durham York right now. I believe Peel and London's may be of a similar, slightly larger size. And across Ontario, I'm not sure the number. I think it's 7 energy from waste facilities. I could be wrong on that number, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. A facility for us at our size, I think with the 5 counties, it's something like a population of 500,000 and a need for something like 160,000 tons a year. That's at about the lowest that would be economically viable for an energy from waste solution.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, did you have a question?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to David. Just wanted to thank David for his work that he's put into this and his knowledge in this field. And I'm sure we'll discuss this at 6.2.1 when it comes up. So I wanted to thank David for his work here. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions for the deputant? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive the deputation and the correspondence with it. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Appreciate you sharing your concerns with us. Thank you. Item 5.1 is correspondence regarding the customer service dashboard from Mr. Webb as well. I'll just ask for a motion to receive that correspondence, please. Moved by Councillor Dunn, second by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Any questions on it? All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. 5.2 is correspondence from the Carden Field Naturalist Subcommittee for Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion in Nature. I'll suggest a motion to receive and forward the correspondence to the CAO for information and consideration through the city's future Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion EDI program implementation. I know that's a mouthful, but I think that's a good place to start. Councillor Elmsley, you'll move that. Second by Councillor Deputy Mayor Richardson. Any questions? All in favor? And that's passed. Thanks. Presentations, we'll move right into our first presentation. Our first one is the 2021 B Hero Awards presentation, and I will turn it over to Deputy Mayor Richardson to walk us through it. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. Okay, we've got it up there. City of Kawartha Lakes is recognizing, and is a bee city, and we're the 7th bee city now out of 59 across Canada, and we support healthy pollinator populations and ongoing efforts to preserve and create pollinator habitats. I know the last 2 years, we've actually seen a huge surge in our natural habitat growing. I also want to take this opportunity now to actually recognize some of our community partners, such in the last year, the Kawartha Lakes Cycling Club, in collaboration with the Pollinator Action Committee of Kawartha Lakes, has taken a project this year where they're biking for pollinators from Lindsay to Fenland and distributing native wildflowers. CLIAC continues to encourage and community engagement, support healthy ecosystems and healthy food sources. Today, we are recognizing our local recipients of the Bee Hero Awards for this following year. Unfortunately, our chairperson, Pat Warren, cannot be here today. She's having some technical issues, so I'm going to walk through this. And again, welcome everyone. We thank you for being part this past year. Okay, sorry if that was. First up, slide there, this is recognizing that we are the Bee City Canada, the City of Kawartha Lakes. Like I mentioned, we were the 7th actually across Canada. Now there is 59. If we can move to the next slide. Okay, so the Lindsay Community Garden. The Lindsay Community Gardens is located on Fleming's College Frost campus. Near the gardens to the west are beehives managed by the college, and just beyond that is the Trans-Canada Trail. To the south are open fields that include a portion of the college gardens. We benefit from Fenland support and take many forms. There's the downspouts from adjacent roofs, direct rainwater into large plastic cubes. College staff bring us wood chips per pathways. Staff from the arboriculture program tend to the orchard, and the sustainable agricultural technician is there sharing their services and providing a fulsome garden. Benita O'Neill and Elizabeth Elliott, 2 longtime members of the Lindsay Community Gardeners, have taken the lead on the pollinator garden, putting in many hours of attention. But as all gardens, everyone's doing their bit. A number of our gardeners, we have 85 gardens right now across this, incorporated into our area, and they're all supported and known as very strong pollinator gardens for the community. So we'd like to take this time right now to recognize the Lindsay Community Gardens, so thank you. Next up is Anne McMillan. I started my garden in the fall of 2020 with the sole purpose of planting things that would attract bees, butterflies, and birds. There are at least 10 varieties of perennials, and they all were purchased from Anna's Perennials near Bob Cajun, where I was given advice on what to plant and what things would be attracted. I'm so excited to see what's going to come in my next growing season. So thank you, Anne. Next is Brenly and Bryce. Our garden's one we started last summer with our mom. Together we planted yarrow, bee balm, blanket flower, and New England asters using the Canadian Wildlife Federation bee pollinator kit. This year we've added a huge amount of daisies and other flowers that are considered under the birthday flowers. We know that bees are attracted to sweet smells and colors, so we thought both plants would fit in perfectly. We have repainted the upcycle tin can in the bee house that we made last year and added a second one as we noticed that it was being used as bees and other insects. It was so much fun watching the flowers bloom over the course of the summer and getting to help Mom water the plants and pull out the weeds to help keep our community garden healthy. We even found a small fairy statue that we added because she holds a leaf that the water collects and the birds and insects drink from it. They're unable to be here today because they're at school, but thank you very much, Brenly and Bryce. Hold on here. Next, we have Michelle McDonald. Our gardens were in need of some TLC after many years of neglect. We have worked very hard to get them to where they are today. We gave the front garden a huge overhaul. We added different plants to help spruce it up, including many pollinators. My 4-year-old daughter is always helping in the garden. She loves watching them grow. I have a couple of small ceramic pots that I let her fill and arrange on her own. We try to use this variety in our pots, hanging baskets, and gardens. We notice more bees, hummingbirds, and butterflies each year. We love spending time in our gardens is truly rewarding. So thank you for doing that with your family. Next, we have Jane Stewart. My wildflower garden. Gardening was always my passion until I discovered golf. I agree with you. My 6 gardens are filled with pollinated plants and bushes. I have hydrangeas, bee balm, and 1 garden full of lavender. Weeding them took some time away from my golfing. A few years ago, the gardener at my golf course planted a wildflower garden. I loved the colors and thought wildflowers you don't have to weed them. So a couple of years ago, I planted 2 kinds of wildflower seeds, one for butterflies and one for bees. Many of the plants are perennials and others reseed themselves and add more seed as well at its time. It's a beautiful array of colors and shapes, and since it's so precious, I weed it often. I was always fascinated by Moet's gardens, so I painted a bench reminiscent of one of his gardens. I placed it in the Willie-themed garden flagstone patio. It's my favorite place to sit and meditate and listen to the birds and watch the butterflies and bees at work. So thank you, Jane. Mary Rose Clark. We started our garden in the spring. The earliest plants were planted before Victoria Day. There were plants that a friend gave us. It took its course, some gardening from the wildlife by the Canadian Wildlife Federation, which I found very interesting. So we decided to go that route. I took a lot of research on the plants, which would be suitable and where I could buy plants. I also had the help of Carrie Demon of Fenland Falls, who works with David Suzuki on Butterfly Way. We decided to only plant perennials. We planted at least as soon as the plants came in, as I ordered them. I've drawn up a plan for the placement of plants, concentrating on color, height, shade, and flowering season. We have 2 apple trees in the garden that cast a shade on different times of the day. Eventually, we have a garden of 88 plants of 40 varieties. Many of our residents of the building took to coming over to the garden to watch our progress. As you imagine, there was quite a lot of work in this, a lot of weed pulling. The area was full of annual grass seedling, which we had to eliminate. This and watering the new plants took us time, but eventually they started to bloom. We were overjoyed. By summer, most of the flowers are in bloom, and this is the picture I sent in for the competition. So many of the residents of our building came out to view the garden and have had so many good comments. This is what we are aiming for, so we are very, very happy. So I just wanted to, I got one more. Tom and Jackie Sanders. Our garden is for the bees, the birds, and the butterflies. Flowering weeds are left for the most part of the natural food. We grow bee balm, lavender, roses, hollyhocks, lupins, stone crops, Russian sage in summer and winter savory. The bees fly in holding powder, waiting to get to these. There are several patches of wildflowers as well, and all is to the left to self-seed. We have color from early spring until the snow flies. We also do not clean out the garden in the fall. We let everything stay until the spring, which gives us the birds some natural food over winter. The antics while harvesting the seed gives us hours of entertainment, low maintenance, and a large variety is our goal. So that is all our winners this year and participants of our Bee Hero pollinators. I want to thank everyone that was able to come online today, and thank you for doing what you do for the environment. It's so good to see the enthusiasm and the dedication to your gardens, and you are making a difference, so thank you very much.
All right, thank you. On behalf of all of council, maybe we can give you a virtual applause for the great work you've done in our community. We appreciate it. Sometimes that appreciation is hard to show when we can't have you here in person, but rest assured, the fact that you're taking the time to beautify our whole community and the environment means a lot to all of us. So thank you for the great work you've done. It's much appreciated. Can I get a motion, please, to receive the presentation? Councillor Deputy Mayor Richardson, Councillor Vale, any questions for anyone? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you again. Appreciate it, ladies. Bye-bye. Okay, item 6.2 is a future waste management options study presentation that we're going to do. I'm going to turn it over to Adam Found, who's going to introduce us to the consultants. Mr. Found, there you are. Welcome. I'm going to turn the presentation over to you, so go ahead.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to check with you that you can hear me okay.
We sure can.
That's good, thank you. So yes, you're correct, Mr. Mayor. We do have a report and a presentation for council to consider today regarding the future of the waste service in the city. And with us, we have Betsy Vargas, who is with Dylan. And Dylan, as you know, is the firm who the city has retained to conduct the study on the future waste options. So before I do hand it over to Betsy, in terms of doing the presentation, I do just want to flag something for council, and that is that we don't have 15 years to do an environmental assessment. We have something more like 8 years, 9 years to do it, and that may be as long as it takes to actually do one. The reason for that is that two key landfills, namely the one in Fenelon and the one in Laxton, are at least under present terms slated to close in the next few years. And once those landfills close, their waste will be largely diverted to Lindsay Ops, which will significantly reduce the lifespan of the Lindsay Ops landfill. And right now we're just finalizing a study that will look at capital upgrades that are necessary to accommodate that significant increase in the flow of waste into Lindsay Ops landfill. And so with that under consideration, there is a sense of urgency here to have this EA started as soon as possible, because if Lindsay Ops is going to reach its current capacity by 2030 or 31, and an EA is going to take up to 8 or 9 years to do, then it is something that needs to start as soon as possible. So with that said, I'll turn it over now to Betsy, who is going to walk you through the presentation.
Thanks very much, Adam. We'll just wait for my presentation to pop up.
It's up on our screen, Betsy, if it's not up on yours.
It is up.
There.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good to go.
I see it now. Great. Thank you. Yes, like Adam said, my name is Betsy Varghese. I am a partner with Dylan Consulting, and I was the project manager for the Future Waste Disposal Study. So today I'm going to go over what our scope of the project was and provide the results of the project. The objective was to share with you today what our evaluation process was, what the evaluation results were, and to discuss the next steps. Next slide, please. So the scope is to review, look at different ways in which the city could manage its residual waste once the city's existing landfill sites capacity are exhausted. So that involved a series of steps as outlined in the city's RFP. So those numbers 1 to 9 outline what those steps in the study were. Essentially looking at the current state, obtaining a list of different technologies and approaches to managing residual waste, defining criteria to evaluate those options, evaluating it, and then discussing the implications and considerations for the preliminary preferred option. Next slide. So why is this project important? There are a series of things that Adam has already touched on. One is that there is decreasing landfill capacity, not only within the city, as Adam mentioned, but also within the province. So within the city generates about 40,000 tons of garbage each year, and it's projected that that number will increase by about 1% per year. Like he said, the Lindsay Ops landfill is anticipated to reach capacity anywhere between 2030 and 2037. And I will touch on that. Part of it is that piece on the other landfills closing and being redirected to Lindsay Ops, but then there's also the impact of waste diversion and increased diversion, which is where that number where this capacity number can range from. The next piece of importance on this project is that it could provide focus for the next steps. So what this study is essentially is the a review of the alternatives to an undertaking. So it's kind of like a pre-environmental assessment study, which can help focus an individual environmental assessment. So individual EAs, they're required for large-scale complex projects that have a potential for significant environmental effects and require the Ministry of approval. The contrary is on the streamlined EAs or class EAs, which are more for routine projects that have predictable and manageable environmental effects that follow a self-assessment process and approvals not directly granted. So in this study, we are looking at the alternatives to, which is a component of an environmental assessment, to look at all the different ways in which waste could be managed. It's following a similar approach that other municipalities or proponents, private and public sector, have taken to, who are only primarily in the business of landfills. They can focus their environmental assessment accordingly to be something that's within their wheelhouse of managing, so to speak. And the last thing is implementation timelines. Should an environmental assessment be required, it takes several years to complete. And so by being proactive and giving it the time it needs to conduct that study of that comprehensive nature is necessary. Next slide, please. So in terms of current state, onto the next one, the city provides services to about 75,000 residents, some businesses and institutions. The city has a significant seasonal population with about 31,000. The population growth is anticipated to grow by 1.2% per year. In terms of collection programs, the city does have a range of waste management programs. So right now there is the Clear Bag program, which was mentioned, which is a great initiative. Bag limits. So right now it's at the 3 bag limit. You can click next on the slide, please. Blue box recycling, of course. There's a leaf and yard waste collection program, batteries, public space recycling, and large items and mattresses and appliances. In terms of depots and drop-offs, there's a series of materials that are accepted for both reuse and recycling. In 2015, the city completed the Making Waste Matters strategy and updated that in 2020. So one of the main target in that strategy was to divert 70% of the city's waste from disposal by 2048. So from the Making Waste Matters strategy, some of the successes here are outlined here. So there's the Clear Bag program, which has demonstrated results with seeing less garbage being generated at the curb, 20% less. And the mattress program, the city estimates about 10,000 mattresses have been diverted from landfill in 3 years. Similar on the construction and demolition waste, seeing great diversion results there with about 1,200 tons being diverted. A textile or clothing diversion program implemented last year, and a virtual tag service to make it easier to recycle those larger items at the curb. So some of the future focus areas, so noting here, the city is halfway in meeting its diversion target. There's a lot of room to grow there. And some of the future focus areas are listed here. The bulky plastic diversion program, looking at banning mattresses from landfill, improving ways to recycle in public spaces, corporate waste reduction targets, and then perhaps the biggest impact that the city could see would be to explore a green bin or an organics collection program and further increasing its efforts to promote backyard composting. In addition to the city's landfills reaching capacity, there is also a provincial disposal capacity issue here as well. So this graph is taken from the Ontario Waste Management Association annual landfill report, where they take a look at all of the landfills operating in the province to see and estimate what the remaining capacity is. So the graph here shows 2 scenarios, one with and one without export of waste to the US. So right now there's about 3.3 million tons of garbage each year that's exported to US disposal facilities annually. And so should export continue, we could see the landfills in Ontario depleting by 2036. And if export stops, then that could be decreased to 2032, where provincial disposal facilities would be depleted. And just noting here in the last point, about 60% of the capacity in Ontario is contained within 7 large landfill sites. The next slide here just covers what the remaining capacities are in the city's 5 landfills, which are shown in this graph on the right. So just click next there. And so these, the Lindsay Ops landfill, like mentioned before, the closure date is variable because of the impacts of both Fenelon and Laxton closing in shortly. And so this closure date, like the note, can you just click 4 more times, please? So this shows the closure dates for all of the landfills and 1 more, and the remaining capacities in terms of the volume available, and if there's expansion capabilities within each of those landfill sites. And click 1 more time, please. Thank you. And so with the forecasted closure date, the closure dates are based on the 2015 Making Waste Matters report, and an ongoing separate study that the city is conducting to look at the impacts of those 2 landfills closing and what that'll do to the capacity of Lindsay Ops as the waste gets redirected from those 2 landfills to this site. So it's a range right now because the work is ongoing, but there's also other factors such as the impact of diversion, and should new diversion programs be implemented, that'll also extend the life. So there's some different factors that impact the closure date. In terms of future state, we did do an analysis of the projected waste quantities over the planning period, taking us to 2048 on the next slide. And so we looked at the waste quantities generated by the residential, the non-residential, or the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector, and depots to come up with the estimated total waste generated. So that's all waste diverted or disposed. And then we looked at a series of diversion scenarios just to see what the range in additional quantities or airspace would be over the planning period. So we looked at the city meeting its diversion target of 70% by 2048. We looked at meeting 75% of that target and 50% of that target. And what the analysis showed was that there would be additional airspace required, and it ranges here from 600,000 cubic meters up to up to 1.6 million cubic meters of space. So options and evaluation. So the first thing that we did was confirm the range of options on the next slide here of which options we should consider. So we looked at a range of both alternative technologies and landfill related options. So on the technology side, we looked at mixed waste processing, mass burn incineration or combustion, gasification, and pyrolysis. And then for landfill related options, we looked at expanding an existing landfill, looking at building a new landfill, mining waste from an existing landfill to regain some capacity, exporting waste out of the city limits, and privatizing city facilities. For each of those options, we looked at these different considerations and conducted research in these different areas. So we were looking at things about, what sort of feedstock do these technologies or options take on? What are their outputs? What are the pros and cons of each? In terms of applicability to the city, we did, as Mr. Webb had mentioned, we did discuss with potential partners to hear from them on where they're at with their projects. So we did talk to 5 counties. The EFW project, we spoke with Eco Waste Solutions. Emerald EFW, an operating mass burn incineration facility in Peel region. And we spoke with the regions of Peel on their plans for mixed waste processing and with Durham region. And then the applicability, so that helped us to inform about the applicability to the city on the feasibility of some other projects that are ongoing. In terms of evaluation criteria and indicators, so we developed the criteria and indicators from our experience from the consulting team and alignment with the principles, goals, and strategies that are outlined within Making Waste Matters, the Kawartha Lake City Strategic Plan, and the city's healthy environmental plan. And with that, we came up with 3 criteria, conducted a triple bottom line evaluation looking at the economic, social, and environmental impacts, and under a series of the indicators as noted here. And I will just mention that this was a generic evaluation. So we looked at, as an example, public acceptance is looking generically at it. It's not city specific, as we hadn't conducted consultation to get feedback on that. So yes, then the evaluation results. So we're presenting just the overview here in the interest of time, but all of the evaluation details, including the rationale for each score that was applied, are provided in Appendix C of our report. And that's included in the package under report number CA 2022-001 for those that are interested. And so the results of the evaluation, this graph is showing the weighted averages where the maximum score for each criteria category, so within this environmental, social, and economic, is 3, with an overall maximum score of 9. So the higher the number, the more preferred the option is. So in general, the technology options, they scored high on environmental impacts given their ability to divert more waste from landfill and to create energy, and scored low as a result of the high capital and operating costs and the high level of risk associated with it. On the landfill related options, the scores ranged given the diversity of options that we're looking at, from siting a brand new landfill to exporting it out of the city limits. But based on the evaluation results, the preliminary preferred option, what is expansion of an existing landfill site. And I will note that we didn't look at specific landfills. This was a generic evaluation, so it wasn't specific to any certain city landfill. So some of the key features or rationale that surrounded this, or that led to this result in terms of economic feasibility. The operating costs would be very similar or less than the existing operating costs today for the city. Capital cost is in the medium range compared to the other options, and low risk in terms of city staff operating this, given the familiarity with managing landfills. In terms of social impact, landfill is a proven approach in Ontario and at the city. There is a lengthy environmental assessment process that includes extensive consultation and potential for public concerns that are anticipated to be addressed through consultation and the current approaches. In terms of environmental impact, more landfill gas will be generated that could potentially allow for energy to be captured. The land requirements for an expansion would depend on the site selected and the expansion method, whether it be a vertical or horizontal expansion or both. And current environmental management and monitoring practices would continue as today. So the last step in one of the final tasks in our study was to look at some of the considerations for implementing the preferred option. And so this next slide here summarizes. So in terms of financial, the cost is estimated. Yeah, go ahead and you can click all of them. The financial is looking at cost of between $2 and $5 million for an environmental assessment, and then additional 10 to 50 million for additional approvals, engineering, design, and construction. In terms of environmental, like I mentioned, the horizontal expansion, should that be a preferred design, could require clearing of vegetation and trees. There would be extensive environmental investigations that would need to be conducted to confirm the suitability of an expansion. In terms of social, the consultation program that would be through an EA is anticipated to mitigate public concerns. And there'd be minimal changes to the nuisance factors like noise, odor, and traffic compared to today. In terms of technical and operational, minimal changes would be required for staffing. It's a familiar operation for city staff, noting that the construction wouldn't begin until the approvals are all secured, which is at least 5 years away. And in terms of regulatory requirements, an individual EA, like I mentioned, would be required, and amendments to environmental compliance approvals. Some additional considerations to point out is that should the city pursue with the landfill expansion approach, it does provide time to allow for other alternative technologies to further demonstrate their suitability or their feasibility for managing municipal solid waste. As an example, some of the technologies that we looked at are not well known for managing the heterogeneous waste stream that is municipal solid waste. So it could buy some time to further develop those technologies. It also allows time for potential partners, as an example, the 5 Counties project, to continue planning for those facilities. The ones that we did talk to were fairly early on in the stages, and likely COVID didn't help with that. So the city could still track and consider the use of alternative technologies, which would just further extend the life of the landfill. And lastly, it's anticipated that this would have the lower level of risk if the city were to have this asset within their own control. So in terms of next steps, so we're here today, and then we're proposing to consult with key stakeholders and the general public. We did meet with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks to present the highlights from our study and to share the preliminary results. And the ministry did suggest consulting with the public to see if there is support from the public on the preliminary results, which could help perhaps focus an environmental assessment. So on consultation, the objective of the consultation would be to seek feedback on our approach, including the criteria used, the options that were considered, the pros and cons for each option, in addition to the final results. And the aim would be to get meaningful feedback to confirm the direction that the city should take in its next steps. So our proposed consultation plan would be to develop the necessary content to achieve those objectives I just spoke about. That would be posted in social media on Jump In, and we would develop a frequently asked questions piece. We'd conduct a virtual stakeholder meeting with those that are interested, like environmental groups as an example, and conduct 2 virtual public consultation events to engage the public. And then the primary method of getting feedback would be via a Jump In online survey. And all of that would be summarized in a consultation summary report. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Betsy. Appreciate that. I'm just going to ask for a motion to receive your presentation, and then we'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor Deputy Mayor Richardson. Councillor Elmsley, you had a question? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of things. We've heard, or we're anticipating, changes to the Blue Box program. How do you feel that will affect the landfills in terms of what goes there now or what gets diverted?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor. It's supposed to be a seamless transition with the move from municipalities being involved with collection and processing of Blue Box recyclables to producers of that material to be responsible. And so they will have targets that they need to meet, and there are still lots of uncertainties with how those targets would be met. But through the city achieving its 70% diversion target, that would be factored into that. I think some improvements in hopefully there would be improvements in packaging and reduction of materials being generated requiring disposal, but it would be captured in that. But generally, it's supposed to be a seamless transition, and so we would expect that there would be some increases as motivators as part of that extended producer responsibility framework.
Thank
Does that
you.
answer your question?
The other thing is, when we talk about vertical loading, and I think there are the two that we would talk about is Laxton and Fenelon. How long would that extend the lives of those two sites? And by extending the life of those two sites, how does that affect the loading at Lindsay Ops?
Thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if this is a question for Adam. That was outside of the scope of our work. The city is conducting its own separate study to look at what could be achieved through vertical expansion of those two landfills, but it was not included in the scope of our work.
Okay, thanks. Do you know if city staff is looking at that, or because it certainly has been talked about at the PRC meetings, and but there was no definition. So I was under the impression you folks were looking at it, but I guess I was mistaken. But do you see that by vertical loading in those two, and I'm asking you to speculate, by vertical loading of those two sites, would it appreciably change the timeline on Lindsay Ops?
Adam, do you want to take a crack at that one?
I sure can, Mr. Mayor. So through you to the councillor. Yeah, let me just clarify. We do have two concurrent studies happening right now. One is the one that is on the docket for today. And then the other one is a study that is looking at the capital upgrades and other modifications that will be required for Lindsay Ops landfill, anticipating that Laxton and Fenelon landfills will close in the near future. Now, as part of the latter study, we have obtained advice from the consultant, which relates to requesting regulatory approvals with the ministry for vertical expansion and some horizontal expansion at those two landfills, Laxton and Fenelon. And so those are tasks that we'll have to see that what the ministry says about them. But if those requests are approved, then we could be looking at extensions of several years of life for those landfills. We don't know yet because we don't know what the exact approval will be and how much net new capacity will be achieved through approvals. But the intent, I think, is to at least approach the ministry to see what they're willing to approve, and then also see what we're willing to do on our end in terms of expenditures to build additional capacity. So that's something that is yet to be determined and will be forthcoming to council.
Okay, thanks for that. Which leads me to my next question, which is talking about removing source-separated organics. There seems to be several different numbers that get bandied about when we talk about removing source-separated organics, from, I guess, as low as 30% to 60 or 70% in terms of what would the reductions be to the landfill. Do do we have any sense of what the true number is? Or is it really dependent upon just how dedicated people are to removing the source-separated organics from the regular waste cycle?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that's probably a question for the Director of Public Works.
Thank you.
A little bit outside of the scope of this project, but Councillor, or Deputy Mayor Richardson, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, thank you for this report today. And I mean, environmental issues right now are at an all-time, level of, people are looking at it, climate change and whatnot. And I like the fact that there's some dialogue regarding moving to something or looking into what Durham and York Region has done. And I know back in 2009 that cost, $272 million, I believe. And right now they're looking to expand that capacity again because of their population growth. I know we've projected ours at 1.2% growth on the charts, but I know, if you look through our planning lens right now, I think we're going to be higher than that. So I'm really happy to hear that we're going to be pushing this EA now because we don't want to play catch up. But I'm wondering if other municipalities are thinking partnership might be the way to move ahead with handling this. Have you ran across that?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe that question was directed to me. Okay. So the partnerships that I've been aware of are the 5 counties one of the scale that would be looked at upon for the Eastern Ontario region. Other municipalities, from what I know, are some have existing landfills like City of London and Halton region as examples. They do still have their own landfills and they're looking to maximize those assets while still considering other technologies that could further extend the life of their landfills. Other municipalities, Toronto and Peel region, had been looking at mixed waste processing as a way, again, to further extract recyclables and organic materials from the waste stream to further extend the life of their landfill in the case of Toronto. I'm not aware of any others that are in process right now that are looking at energy from waste at this time, aside from the municipalities that have been involved with the 5 counties project.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you to a couple of questions to Betsy and then third one to Adam. First one is you mentioned about materials that are going in to the landfill, and did you look at incentives for construction waste and to see what calculation, what percentage that would divert and give us more room if we incentivized more construction material going into the landfills?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor, we didn't look at specific feedstocks. We were looking at as a whole residual waste quantities to be managed under a range of diversion scenarios. So how that diversion would be achieved was not included as part of our scope of work, but I do know through Making Waste Matters, the city has been looking at ways to further divert construction and demolition waste. So I would defer that to the city.
Okay, and getting back to looking at partnering with the Durham York Energy Center, which is in Clarington, and the proposed 5 counties project, which I assume will be in Havelock. That's where the last location was that we're talking about. You mentioned that you were in consultation with them. Did you get anything in detail back from them? Did they give you anything in detail, like figures or capacity, or how we could enter into an agreement of understanding, we could partner with them? Did you get into any sort of details with these 2 entities in your study?
Yes, and with Durham York, when we spoke with Region of Durham, they said right now the facility is to manage waste that's generated within the boundaries of the regions of Durham and York only. So they weren't looking for external partners at this time. And then when we spoke with 5 counties, They are looking to mimic the technology and the tonnage that goes through Durham York, so a similar scale and similar technology. But I believe at the time that we spoke to them, which was several months ago, looking at financing and partners was their roadblock, and that was one of the things that they were hoping to pursue. So as I mentioned, it can continue on as is, and they can still see if it becomes viable and feasible if they get the right financing and partnerships in order to make it economically viable.
With respect to that, did they give you an actual figure of how much it would cost to construct a plant like that, a facility like that, for the 5 counties? Do they have a rough idea how much it would cost to build one?
They kept saying they were going to mimic it would be very, very similar to the Durham York facility, and which had cost about $285 million. I don't recall them giving me a number, but it was similar to, they just mentioned the similarities to what Durham York was.
Okay, thank you. And the last question was to Adam, Dr. Found. You had mentioned that the EA would take 8 to 9 years, and just wondering why it would take 9 years for environmental assessment. We see projects that we can get EAs done in less than a year, and also the cost, 3 to 5 million, from if I'm correct in reading what was up there. So the length of time to take that, almost 10 years for an EA, and the cost involved in that EA, are those, I guess my main question is the length of time, why it takes almost 10 years for an EA to happen.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the key difference here is that we're talking about an individual EA as opposed to a municipal class EA. Municipal class EAs are the ones that we're quite accustomed to doing here at the city. And I think that those are the types of EAs that the councillor has in mind. When it comes to an individual EA, my understanding is that the requirements are much more stringent. The length of time is much greater, and of course the cost too is much greater. But I'm admittedly not the expert on EAs, and so I'll defer the rest of the answer to the Director of Engineering and Corporate Assets, because I think he can probably explain it a little better than I can.
Thank you, Adam. Through you, Mr. Mayor, Adam is correct. Typically, the council has seen and been involved in municipal class EAs. They're a very streamlined process in accordance with the EA Act. I believe Betsy had one of her first 2 slides mentioned that briefly, but in more detail, a municipal class EA is very streamlined. The process itself is pre-approved. That's why it takes typically a year or 2 to complete. Some examples are any of our bridge projects are typically a class B or a class C. That again, taking a time range of 1 to 2, at most 3 years to complete. An individual EA is not streamlined. The process isn't defined. The city has to create a terms of reference to go to the ministry for approval. We're trying to streamline it by taking a pre-EA approach to narrow down or frame the options, but it's still in essence an individual EA. So this would be the first that the city has done, City of Kawartha Lakes has done. And I believe Victoria County and the town of Lindsay, this would be the first individual class EA, which again is very, very unique.
Fine, thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Betsy, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I have no issues with the timing of the EA. I understand we never have as much time for these things as we like, so getting out on it early, I'm in full support of. What I'm curious about is, when we go to the public meeting before we come back with the scope of an EA, why are we not getting public input on more, or looking more at a hybrid approach? I mean, I understand the background work you've done. I read your study in the report. I really did. It was a long study, but I read it, and there was some good information in there, and it really sort of helped justify why you've come up with this option, which seems to obviously from a cost perspective, and, you know, it makes a lot of sense with all your different factors. But while we're doing that, if we pursue an expansion of the landfill, why not look at, you know, mining at the same time? Why not look at exporting some of our waste, not all of it? Why not look at maybe a new landfill site in partnership with another municipality, or even an incinerator somewhere in partnership? Like, it just seems like we're putting all our eggs in one basket with this recommendation. I'm wondering, like, why not go out to the public and say, you know, what about a hybrid option? I mean, if expanding the landfill in Lindsay gets us another, whatever, 20 years, you know, if we're exporting X percentage of our waste, we're doing new, diverting more waste, you know, with more technology as we move forward over the next bunch of years. Like, why can't we do a bunch of these options? Why do we just have to look at, we're just going to go down this road? It's obviously the most, I don't want to say it's the easiest, but it makes the most sense for sure. But why not pursue a few other options at the same time? And maybe we, you know, instead of trying to do it all at once. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but go ahead.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, I mean, nothing would preclude the city from pursuing other alternatives and other options, like exporting, like partnering with other facilities and technologies. Should the city want to still incorporate expanding of an existing landfill site, that process, though, is that individual EA process, which would need to be undertaken to give it enough time so that you do have that as a backup. But I know other municipalities have done that, where they're looking at contingency capacity by, you know, different methods like, you know, changing the tipping fee to disincentivize waste coming to the city sites, exporting it, looking at other partnerships. But those are things that would be outside of the city's regulatory requirements. So going through an individual EA for your main asset, I guess, like this main approach of landfill expansion would be a necessary step, but it would not preclude the city from considering other approaches to further extending the life of that asset and looking at options and getting into different technologies and partnerships that are proven feasible.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question through you to Juan. If I want to get angry at somebody about an EA taking 9 years, who am I angry at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So again, the city is following the MECP process. So that's the ministry that has carriage over the EA Act. It is a provincial act. So I guess you would be getting mad at the province because we're following the framework and the regulations as laid out in that act.
Thank you. I tend to share Councillor Ashmore's concerns. I can't imagine anything should take 9 years. If I start my kid off in school, 9 years later he's done, or he's in high school, I guess. But like 9 years, it just doesn't seem reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Councillor Riley?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through just to confirm, the growth projections to 248, does that include many of the developments that have come recently, or when, or for consideration? Because we've had a number of properties that have been bought, and we've had 5 MZOs recently, and which is going to obviously speed up some of the development. We realize we're in very early stages, but I was just wondering what growth projections you're using for the 248.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor, we looked at we use the city's population projections as our basis for determining the future waste quantities. So what was provided from the planning department is what we used.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashmore, follow up?
Follow up, please. One thing I forgot to ask was, and I was looking through the report before, and I'm just trying to find it, but anyways, it did say in there that it wasn't specifically going to be Lindsay Ops landfill site, which has a big footprint. There's a lot of acreage around there. In your report, it did say that there's the possibility of looking at other sites within the city. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you for the question. And through you, Mr. Mayor, it is one of that one slide that I showed there that had all landfills had some sort of capability for expansion. And it is something that we did speak with the ministry about what could multiple sites be expanded to achieve the necessary capacity and to be able to still provide the local disposal facility network that the city currently employs. And so it's something that would be considered as part of the alternative methods to achieving your desired or necessary capacity limits as part of the individual EA process would be to look at how can you get that necessary capacity.
Thanks. Actually, the question I specifically was going to ask, or will ask, is not the existing landfills that we have, but any new sites within the city, any new areas, any new sites that would be proposed other than our existing landfills. That's what I'm trying to ask. Are you contemplating any other sites?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we are not looking at any other site. That was the one option of to build a new landfill site. So that was that option. So expanding landfills were to expand an existing landfill site only.
Thank you. I see no further questions. We have a motion to receive the presentation. So all in favor? And that's passed. Thank you very much, Betsy. Appreciate that. And Adam, we'll move down to 621, which is the report, Future Waste Management Options Study. There's a recommendation that the study be received, that a public consultation for future options regarding the city's waste management service be conducted, and that staff report on the results of the public consultation by the end of Q3 this year, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Councillor Elmsley, you'll move that? Thank you. Can I get a seconder? Councillor Vale, thank you. Any questions or comments? I have a quick question, Adam, on the report. Is when we go out to public consultation, will part of that public consultation involve some of the other options that are out there as well, like just as part of the conversation? I know we're offering up a preferred option and you want to get the public's opinion on that, but some of the other options that are part of the study, will they be part of that public consultation so the public sort of sees the scope of what we're looking at and we get their opinion on it? I just want clarification on that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the question. Indeed, that is a key rationale for holding the public consultation, is to not only outline what the preliminary preferred option at least appears to be right now, but also to gather the public's input on all the other options that were considered. So I believe it will in part achieve what appears to be your aim.
And the results of this we're not approving any scope of an EA here today. We'll get the public consultation. That information will come back to council in the fall, and at some point, either later this council or the next council, will approve the scope of an EA moving forward. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. Councillor Ashmore, did you have a question?
No, you answered it, because I want to make sure clarification that we weren't starting the EA right now. We're just doing public consultation. That's good, thanks.
Okay, any other questions regarding the report? I'll call the question then. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Betsy. Appreciate it. Let's move down to presentation 6.3, which is the Active Transportation Master Plan Task Force presentation. Jonathan Derwowitz. I always get my tongue around that one, Jonathan, so maybe I'll just call you John.
Perfect.
If you want to make the introductions, and we can hear you just fine, and go ahead, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So good afternoon, committee of a whole. We've got quite the jam-packed agenda. And then we've got bees and landfill discussions and then heritage to close it off. So today, I am introducing Niluka Linage and Catherine Jim with SEMA, who have been selected to work on and complete the city's first active transportation master plan. So the purpose of the report in front of you folks today is to basically request that task force in support of the active transportation master plan be moved to be created and established. So this is just the first step in that process. And then following that, should it be approved, we would move into advertising and then interviewing candidates for the project. And that is just a quick summary of the report in front of you. And I will turn it over to Catherine and Niluka with SEMA to take it away and give you an overview of the project itself, a bit of the consultation period that we're currently under, and really get into the makeup of the active transportation master plan task force.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. And if we may ask the presentation to be shared. Great, perfect. So we put together a quick presentation to explain on a high level what this active transportation master plan, which we short from ATMP, is about, sharing the objectives. We will talk about the project's process a little bit, diving into the consultation program that we have prepared, and also more specifically, what the ATMP task force is going to be about. So next slide, please. So first of all, we're really excited to be part of the team in assisting the city in putting together the first ATMP. So the overall goal is to enhance the city's active transportation network, which is in line with the city's council's direction, as well as various cities' planning policies in the past few years. And as we know, the city is growing. It is a large municipality. It has a very diverse population. And of course, as growth continues, there's a need for people movement, but we also recognize that we can no longer just focus on vehicular traffic. We wanted to have an emphasis on active transportation to get people moving, to build a sustainable community. So really the objectives of the active transportation master plan are to help develop a strategy for safe, equitable, comfortable alternative transportation modes, particularly for walking, cycling, rollerblading, really anything active for community residents, and also for tourists and visitors of Kawartha Lakes, because we know, during the warmer months, many visitors tend to visit the area, and we have an influx of visitors. So, and as we know with infrastructure, they cannot all be built overnight. So through the ATMP, we would also like to provide a recommendation where some of these active transportation facilities may be located. We wanted to prioritize a short, medium, and long-term implementation plan, so that we can score some of the quick wins in the short term, but also trying to plan for longer term network throughout the communities, how we can build a network and really get people moving through the active transportation facilities. And as council may be aware as well, there's also an ongoing trail master plan update. So the question may be, how are these two connected and how are they integrated? So this is where the next slide will explain a little bit of that. So in this next slide, we have a diagram indicating how the trail plan and the active transportation master plan overlaps. So first of all, the trail plan, which is being carried out by another team also at SEMA together with the city, will be focusing more on the off-road destination-based trail. Again, it is to accommodate active transportation use, but more for active and motorized user. From a design perspective, it will be using guidelines that will meet AODA compliance, but a set of standards is going to be developed specific to Kawartha Lakes. Whereas on the active transportation master plan side, our focus will more be on the on-road and in boulevard facilities that accommodate active transportation users. The design guideline that we'll be using will be based on the Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18 and also other accepted design guidelines for roads and infrastructure. So the key consideration here is where we're appropriate, the ATMP will try to identify improvement opportunity between the on-road and also that connects to trail, because we recognize these systems, they don't just cut off and say, oh, this is for the road and this is for the trail, and that's it, because there's going to be a connection. That's how we build a network. We want to be able to prioritize and also to phase some of these routes and how they can complement each other. So there's needs to be a recognition, what are some of the also short, medium term initiative from the trail master plan side, and then how it can best complement with the AT master plan as well. There needs to be a continuity of the design to make sure that these facilities are connected properly and where feasible. So the design elements also need to look at that continuity. And also there will be signage being provided on both projects, but the more branded signage will be part of the trail master plan scope. So together with the trail plan and the active transportation master plan, we would like to cover the recreation as well as the transportation mobility side for City of Kawartha Lakes. So next slide, please. So this slide has a lot of text on it, but essentially is trying to explain the project process as an overview. So in general, our project is divided into 3 phases, and each phase has designated round of engagement. So our project started back in October last year. We just completed our what we call pre-consultation phase, where we have developed a stakeholder and consultation plan. And also we have created material, which has been recently launched on the Jump-In page. That was done in January this year. And on the website itself, there's an online survey where members of the public are invited to register, to know about updates of the study, and also to participate in a survey which gear around some of the questions on how they're using active transportation facilities now, what are their hopes in this active transportation master plan. So far we have received over 100 responses already. Many of them are showing general interest of the study. There has been a couple of discussion forum which have been started on the website already. And again, it's generally people expressing their interest in walking, in cycling. They want to see improvement in the active transportation facility realm within the city because they really do see this being an alternative way to vehicular traffic. And as the city grow, these type of infrastructure is really needed. So in the next phases of our project, our immediate next step is to look at the background review and create what we call an existing condition profile, where we understand what is the AT condition right now, where are the routes, and where we're missing, to identify where the problems and opportunities are. After that, we'll have a round of consultation on that. And then the next couple of phases will focus on the network recommendation and priorities. And then finally, on the implementation plan, looking at costing, maintenance, and operation. And at the end of the study, we'll be producing a final document for the active transportation master plan. So at this time, we're anticipating project completion in March, which is around spring next year. And as you can see from this graph, we have a few consultation points that we have planned for. So maybe with that, I will pass it over to Niluka, who will dive into a little bit more detail on our consultation program.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, you can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so as Catherine mentioned, we've actually already kind of began the initial consultation with the survey. But the overall plan is to have quite an extensive form of engagement. And that includes, besides sort of the public at large, but really engaging with some of the internal stakeholders at city staff and the decision makers, this ATMP task force that we'll talk about a little bit more next, a technical advisory committee, consulting with Indigenous communities, equity seeking groups such as people with disabilities. And then as well, obviously local businesses have the potential to benefit. And there may be some more specific interest groups like cycling specific groups, for example. So you can see on the slide there is just a picture of the jump-in page where we've, at the bottom there is the survey. So that's where some of the comments are already starting to come in, which is great. You can move to the next slide. So just to drill down a little bit more into the ATMP task force, the goal here is that it will be representative of the community members and groups, and to strike out about 15 members on it, 1 council representative, about 8 stakeholders from that list, and another 6 from the members at large. They also we'd like to have them elect a chair and a vice chair from within that membership. And the goal really is for them to review, it's a review body that would provide advice and recommendations to council and staff on strategies and policies related to active transportation. As well, that they would review and comment on this actual project and all the deliverables throughout the phases. You can go to the next slide, please. And the terms would, after today's meeting, would get underway to strike that task force, and the terms would end by mid-November 2022, so in about 8 to 9 months, just to coincide with the current council terms. And so at that point, we would be needing an extension as well. They would meet basically 4 times over the term, so that's once every couple of months. And their recommendations would be brought forward to council through the planning division through a report. Next slide, please. So the next steps, essentially, like Catherine mentioned, we're starting the feedback review that's coming in from the surveys online. And then we're moving into those other, it's part 2 of phase 1 stage, where we're doing all those background reviews, best practices. We're starting to compile the actual data and put it on maps. And here we are today to talk about the task force. And then after that, we would be preparing the round 1 engagement. And I think that's it for today.
Thank you for that. Much appreciated. I'll just get a motion to receive, and we'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Dunn, second by Deputy Mayor Richardson. Are there any questions for the presenters from SEMA or for John? Then Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a very brief question. 15 members. In my world, that's huge. Is that a manageable size task force? We had 16 members on council, and we as council decided that was twice as many as what we needed and downsized. I just find 15 members to be a huge number. Do you have comments on that?
Through the mayor. Sorry, I'll start off with that one. Yes, 15 members, fairly sizable group. We understand that there is a lot of interest from the community in seeing this project through and seeing this project successful. There are many, as Niluka alluded to, many special interest groups that are chomping at the bit, frankly, to get involved with this project. So I personally do not feel that there will be difficulty in soliciting that many members and obtaining their interest for the duration of this project. There, you will note in the terms of reference for quorum, we are looking for the majority of the members. So that'll be 8 members to reach quorum to form a meeting. And having more members also allows us to have a frankly better chance at success of reaching quorum for those meetings. And from there, I will turn it over back to our consultant to follow up.
Great. Niluka, you take
Sure.
this one.
Well, Jonathan, thank you very much. Jonathan answered most of the questions. I should just add that as well. Given the size of the city of Kawartha Lakes, what's also important is to make sure that we've got sort of the geographic coverage of people on the task force and the diversity of people that you find using and wanting to use active transportation. So it does have a better success because you're getting more buy-in from people directly in the community and across the span of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my question was never about finding enough people to get involved. My question was revolving around, can you get anything done with 15 members? That's where I was coming from. I have no doubt that you'll have lots of people that'll want to participate, but it's sometimes hard, as I said, going back to council, it's sometimes hard to get anything done when you have a group of 7 and a group of 8 all arguing with each other. And but anyway, it's an interesting presentation. I will support the motion going forward.
It'll take a strong chair to lead it forward. But we had 16 councillors here, and we got much accomplished when I was chair. Just wanted to say that. Councillor Ashmore, you wanted to had a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, it was just similar through you to Jonathan, similar to a previous councillor asked about, you had said about special interest groups on it. It would be made up of special interest groups. I'm just wondering if you could define that. And is there going to be a balance of special interest groups that are going to be on this task force? Because, you know, you start saying special interest groups. I just wanted to know what that was. Just a question.
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Ashmore. Through the mayor, so the City of Kawartha Lakes there are a number of cycling groups. There are a number of environmental groups who we would consider these special interest groups that have already expressed interest in the project, as well as the Trails Master Plan project. So as Catherine stated, and frankly well summarized, the synergy, I guess, in the 2 projects, we are able to, that's one of the pieces of that synergy. We are able to not vet necessarily, but have a good cross-representation and good understanding of who comprises these special interest groups. There has also been some correspondence earlier on in this project where the Green Trails Alliance and the other cycling oriented groups have sort of appointed spokespeople, if you will, to represent them kind of writ large. The balance of the task force is it'll be fairly well divided from members of the public to be members at large, as well as the groups from the special interest groups that we're referring to them as. And there will also be opportunity for conversations outside, of those formal meetings. We are anticipating a number of other meetings with these groups, like the Trails Master Plan has already undertaken. So it might, or frankly, it will take some navigating and managing expectations, and we're really defining these roles so that we are hearing from everybody at an equal level, on an equal basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunn, follow up?
Just one question, because of the special interest part. Are you planning on inviting developers to come, because they're the ones that are going to pay for it?
The developers have not been identified as part of the quote special interest groups. If there will be opportunity in the public member there for the public members, developers can certainly sign up and be considered. The group itself will work as closely as they can with developers. If we have folks, or we do know we have developers who have brought plans forward that are currently being reviewed, and we will try and do our best to coordinate, a bit of a review from the active transportation lens on some projects. And if, like I said, if there is interest, it'll be a public process or public notice, to advertise for seats. So if there are some that would like to participate, then absolutely.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, we have a motion to receive the presentation. I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it. 613 is the report. The presentation was really an overview of the study. This is just the terms of reference. So there's a motion in front of us that the report be received, that the Active Transportation Master Plan Task Force terms of reference substantially in the form attached as Appendix A to Report Plan 2022-006 be approved and adopted by Council, and that this recommendation be brought forward to Council for consideration at the next regular Council meeting. Deputy Mayor Richardson, you'll move that. Councillor O'Reilly, you'll second that. Any questions on the terms of reference? I'll call the question then. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thank you very much, folks. Appreciate it. We'll look forward to your information. Okay, we're just going to keep going here. We got one more presentation, and I know Emily Turner's joining us from the Heritage. Emily talks fast, so we're good to go. So Emily, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation on the Heritage Inventory Framework. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure I will speed right through this. So I have, there's the PowerPoint there, great. So I've just got a PowerPoint to run through with Council today, just to chat about the project that's being discussed in the report. So this is a really large project for us in Kawartha Lakes, so I wanted to bring this forward to Council before we got going, so that Council could see what we're up to in the heritage planning world. So one of the things, the big challenge that I have in heritage is that we have a ton of cultural heritage resources in Kawartha Lakes. They're very diverse, they're all over the place, and we really have no idea what most of them are. So we obviously have our heritage register, which identifies our designated properties, our heritage conservation districts, and our listed properties. But we also have a lot of other really important heritage resources in the municipality that have not been formally identified. There's lots of things out there that, I know they're there, but they don't have protection. But there's also things out there that really just, I have no idea that they exist. So when we're looking at doing our heritage planning program, sometimes we're flying in the dark, which is not great if you're looking for a data-driven program that delivers some results. So what's being proposed here is to undertake a full inventory of heritage resources in the municipality. So this is a really big project, but it's something that's important for us to do. Next slide. So the main goal of this inventory is to gather data on all the heritage resources in Kawartha Lakes. So I'd like to stress to Council that this is a data gathering exercise. So that's the primary goal of this. So we know it's out there and we can use that to make decisions. So this data, it'll eventually be used as part of a decision-making process regarding how the city preserves and protects its heritage resources. And that's in the short, medium, and long term. And it's really important that we know what these resources are so we can proactively look at our heritage resources and incorporate them into our planning program. So this is both heritage planning, but also our land use planning program. So increasingly heritage resources are being integrated into the land use planning process, and we do need to know what those resources are so that we can make informed decision-making. And this is gonna lead to smart, informed decision-making when we're looking at heritage resources throughout the city. Next slide. So I know I've talked to Council about this before, but just a quick reminder, what we really want to be doing in Kawartha Lakes is doing proactive heritage planning. So this is opposed to being reactive in terms of managing our heritage resources. So at the moment, we try really hard to be proactive in the work that we do, but we do end up certainly doing some reactive work, and that's not what we want to do for transparent decision making. When we're proactive, we increase efficiency, we're more transparent, we provide better customer service, and it also really helps Council and staff make better decisions when it comes to protecting heritage resources. It's also better for our property owners as well, and anyone wishing to make investments in our communities, because it makes heritage conservation really transparent. So when we've identified what heritage resources are, which one of those deserve protection, how that protection happens, everybody knows what the city expects of its heritage management program, and that's really important. So what we want to be is we want to be data-driven, we want to be consistent, we want to be comprehensive, and we want to be transparent. And that facilitates good planning and good decision-making. Next slide. So I think one of the questions that I often think of, and I think it's important for Council to think of when we're looking at heritage management within that wider land use planning context, is how do we maintain what makes our communities unique and vibrant while encouraging new development and sustainable growth? So we certainly want to have new development in our communities. It's really important for our economic growth. But we also want to make sure that things that make our communities unique, our history, culturally interesting, we want to make sure that those are preserved. So we can work together. Heritage is not incompatible with growth, but it requires data, policy, and clear processes to make that happen. So at the moment at the city, we've got some good processes within staff. We have some great standard operating procedures for how we deal with heritage properties. We have some policies as well. So our policy development is coming along really nicely, but where we're really missing is on that data front. So we just don't have the data to do good decision making. Next slide. So for this inventory project, there's really 5 key goals. So the first one is, I think the really major one, which is to identify the cultural heritage resources in Kawartha Lake. So we want to know what's here and where it is. The next is to evaluate resources to determine their significance. So just because something is old doesn't mean that it's important. So we need to have a look at these resources and determine whether or not they are significant and whether or not they should be protected in some way. The next is to protect resources through different heritage and planning mechanisms. There's lots of different ways that we can protect our heritage resources. So we need to decide what the best way to do that is. The next is to engage with the community on the identification and protection of resources. So having community engagement in this project is super important. We want to know what our different communities throughout Kawartha Lakes thinks, what's important to them and what they want to see preserved. And then the last is to provide comprehensive and transparent data on the city's cultural heritage resources. So at the end of the day, we'd like this data to be public. So everybody can see what our heritage resources are, where they are, and how they're protected. Okay, next slide. All right, so for the inventory, there's some important impacts. I'm just going to highlight them here, but you'll see them in your report package as well. There's a lot of use for this data in terms of municipal projects, and it can really help inform decision-making for different city initiatives and priorities. So for me, I think that it's pretty clear, knowing where heritage resources are is really important for the work that I do. But in terms of some of the wider work that we do at the city within development services, but in some of our other departments as well, some of those bigger picture projects, this can really be helpful across the city in terms of how we conduct our business. So having this comprehensive data will be very useful for us. Next slide. So in order to get this inventory going, I've developed a framework to guide this project. So this is really a high-level roadmap to undertake the inventory. And it has a few outcomes as well. So it's intended to provide a rationale for inventorying heritage properties, identify the types of resources that will be identified through the inventory, identify current and existing resources, provide a high-level overview of the processes for surveying, evaluating, and recommending properties for protection, and identifying priority areas. So this is the framework that you've been presented, which is attached to the report that goes with the presentation. So these are the goals for that particular framework. Next slide. So within that framework, it identifies 3 steps for the inventory process. And this is what we'll be doing to do this project. So the first one is to survey. So this is a field survey of historic properties. So basically it means going out, looking for historic properties in our communities, taking photographs, inputting them into our existing city mapping system so we know where they are and what they are. The next is to evaluate them. So I've developed, based on the Provincial Ontario Regulation 906, a heritage evaluation matrix. And this provides a consistent way of evaluating heritage properties throughout the city. So we know whether or not something is significant or whether or not it doesn't really have significance within the community. This also involves the preparation of historic context statements, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, which help guide and provide an analytical framework for understanding why properties are important within our communities. And then the final is recommending properties either for listing or designation, a direct protection through the Ontario Heritage Act, or for protecting them through other policy mechanisms. Now, this isn't something that we've done a lot of in Kawartha Lakes, is to use other policy mechanisms for heritage protection. But it's something I'd like to see us increasingly use because it's very effective and it does a good job in protecting heritage properties within a wider context. And just these all involve community and stakeholder consultation. So it's not just me running around taking some photos. We'll be getting out there and chatting to folks in our communities about what is important to them. Next slide. So property evaluation. This is an important part of understanding what's significant in our communities. So each will go at a high level evaluation to determine if they have cultural heritage value, and whether or not they should have some kind of protection, whether that's direct or indirect protection. The evaluation matrix, as I mentioned, has been prepared, and it means that everything will be consistent as we go through the properties. We want to be really consistent as we do this, so that everything is being measured across the same benchmark. Properties are also going to be linked to geographic and thematic historic context statements. And these are intended to put them in the wider context of where they're located and how they fit in those historical narratives and themes that have defined how Kawartha Lakes has grown over the past, well, 200 years in many cases for some of our communities. Next slide. So historic context statements, this is something that's going to form an important part of this. And what these do is they provide an analytical framework for property evaluation. So this is something that's done fairly frequently in the United States and in Europe. It's not done as much in Canada because, to be honest, we're not as good at heritage conservation as some other places in the world. But it really provides an effective way of looking at buildings beyond just their architectural value. So sometimes we see something, it's a humble building or structure. It might not be architecturally spectacular, but it has a lot of significance to a community for a certain reason. So this is a way that we can look at things within the context of how a community developed, how different themes within our municipality developed, and identify things that are important. So the one that I've provided you with is for the lumber industry. And I'm sure, as I'm sure you're aware, there's lots of properties that are tied to that particular industry that you may not identify if you're not thinking about it in that context. So it helps us analyze our properties and what makes Kawartha Lakes unique, important, and really how we've developed over the years. Next slide, please. So one of the things I just like to highlight is how we protect heritage properties. So really at the end of the day, the inventory will inform the protection of different heritage assets throughout the city. And there are different mechanisms to do so. So we usually think of designation or listing as the ways that you protect heritage properties, but those are not the only ways that we can do it. Next slide. So just so everyone's aware, just because a property is surveyed does not mean that it will be protected through any kind of mechanism. So probably most of the properties that are inventoried, they'll just stay in the database. We'll know that they're there. Say if a development application comes through, we'll have an evaluation on them, but we're really not going to do anything. They'll just stay as those surveyed properties. From those surveyed properties, we'll have a smaller group that have been evaluated and will probably be recommended for listing through council. And we'll have community consultation on that as well. Within that, there'll be an even smaller group of properties which may warrant designation under the Heritage Act. For the most part, we're not going out there like looking for properties to designate. We're doing this to see what's out there and whether or not it's important. Next slide. So I'd just like to touch on the ways that properties can be protected. First is direct protection through the Ontario Heritage Act. And this is something that council is quite familiar with since we bring these types of recommendations forward fairly frequently. So the first is individual designation under Part 4 of the Act, designation as part of a heritage conservation district, listing on the Heritage Register, or the entering into a heritage easement agreement on a property. So these are direct protection mechanisms. They put certain restrictions on properties, so certain things can't be done with them. And this is kind of what we're familiar with in terms of how we protect heritage properties. Next slide. The other way that we can do this is through indirect protection through properties, and this is afforded at a higher level policy development. So this is through our planning policy. So when we look at this is things like official plan policies, heritage zoning overlays, form-based codes, pattern zoning provisions within our comprehensive zoning bylaws, tertiary or neighborhood plans, place-based or community-specific architectural design guidelines, or demolition control bylaws. There's different ways that we can protect heritage properties without, say, formally designating them by encouraging them to be preserved. But we need to know what's there before we can start thinking about these policy initiatives. So these have been used in a lot of other municipalities, both in Ontario and elsewhere. And it's certainly something that that we should be considering as we're looking at increased growth in the city and looking for a dynamic planning policy that both allows for that growth and respects our heritage resources. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's 4 primary types of heritage resources, and we will be looking at 3 of them through this framework. So built heritage resources, natural heritage resources, and cultural heritage landscapes. We're not going to be looking at archaeological resources, and I will touch on that in a moment. Next slide. So just to run through this with everybody, our built heritage resources, those are our most common type of heritage resource. It's what you normally think of when you think of heritage structures. So, you know, various structures and buildings made by human and associated with history. So, you know, houses, churches, schools, commercial buildings, monuments, those sorts of items. And we see those all the time, so we're quite familiar with those. Next slide. The next is natural heritage resources. So these are features from the natural world that have social and cultural heritage value because of their relationship to human society. So they might be protected through environmental policies, but this recognizes them for their heritage value. So for example, the picture here on your screen, this is a picture of Riverside Cemetery in Lindsay, and you can see it has lots of heritage features, natural heritage features in it, and the trees, for example, in here are important because of their relationship to the cemetery. So we'll be looking for these as well, particularly in the context of certain areas. Next slide. The final one we'll be looking at are cultural heritage landscapes. And these are groupings of structures, buildings, natural elements, or other interrelated heritage resources. And these are ones, they're complex, they span multiple properties, but they work together to have cultural heritage value. So we often protect these as a heritage conservation district. So thinking about our downtown Lindsay Conservation District, for example, each of the historic buildings is important in that area, but together they form that important historic downtown. So cultural heritage landscapes, it's different things taken together that form a united whole. Next slide. What we won't be looking at are archaeological resources. So they have a separate protection framework under Part 6 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and the data is also confidential. So we want this to be a public project. So dealing with archaeological resources, it needs to be a separate project and it's outside of this framework. So we won't be touching on that as part of this. Next slide. All right, now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of how this is all going to work. So this is a data collection project. So we have a lot of some work to do on the data collection and management front. So we're going to be using the city's existing GIS platform, ArcGIS. And ArcGIS has an app that it's developed called ArcGIS Collector, and it's intended for in-the-field data collection. And it syncs with the city's existing mapping system. So it allows, say for example, me to go out in the field. I can take photos of a building. I can take a GIS or GPS location. I can fill in a form about a building while I'm on site, and it uploads into our city's existing mapping system. So that's what we'll be using. It's the most efficient way to do this. And it means that we can be updating our mapping in real time. And also when we go to have this data public, it'll be much easier to put it out there because it'll already be within our existing mapping system. So we have a fillable data collection form for this project. It's already been created and tested in ArcGIS Collector. It works, which is great. So it's fairly straightforward to use as well. There's also a paper version of the form, which is attached to your report, so you can see what kind of data we're looking for. And it'll be available should it be required as a backup, because as we all know, tech fails sometimes. So it's good to have that backup just in case. Next slide. So one of the big things for this project is doing community involvement. So we really want the community or our various communities throughout Kawartha Lakes to be involved in this project. People in our communities know about heritage resources in their own places better than I do. So they're the ones who are hopefully going to help drive this process, let us as the city know what's important to them, and provide that data and information that we need. So community members are invited to help out with the surveying or providing information on the evaluation of properties. So we're going to be starting by holding some public meetings in the spring to raise awareness about the project. And we'll also be using the Jump In platform for online engagement. So that public engagement will start right away to get people on board with this project. It's also intended to help raise awareness about the city's heritage planning program in general. Our heritage planning program is fairly new, and people don't always know how it works. So this will be a great opportunity to get out there and chat about the good heritage work that we do at the city, so that people know about that. Next slide. So we've also identified some priority areas where we're going to start. So the city is huge, as we all know, and it presents some really distinct challenges for doing work of all kinds for the municipality. But we have identified some priority areas, and these are the ones which are under the highest risk of highest development pressure, or are an increased risk of being lost. So in particular, those are our settlement areas where most of our development will be directed over the next little while. So we'll be starting with those. We've also identified a few other priority areas, such as waterfront properties, just because they do have an increased risk of demolition compared to other properties within the municipality in our rural areas. So we'll be looking at those as well. We also have our longer term priorities. Eventually we'll get to the whole city. But as I'm sure everybody is aware, this is a huge project and it's going to take a long time. So we do need to prioritize how we're going to have this project move forward. Next slide. Timeline and work plans. So this is a huge project, and it'll take between 5 and 10 years. Oh, I think we've gone one slide too far. Oh, there we go. Great. It's going to take a long time, probably 5 to 10 years to complete. One thing I will say, it's very difficult to estimate the timeline due to the unique urban and rural nature of the municipality. So other municipalities have undertaken projects like this, and they've mostly been large urban municipalities. So even though they have more properties than we do, they're a lot closer together. So we have a very unique situation here, which makes it really hard to know how long this is going to take, but expect it to take quite a number of years to do. It'll also depend on staff workload and volunteer capacity. If we can get lots of keen volunteers, it'll go a lot faster. So hopefully everyone in our community is excited to help out. So we are going to be developing work plans as the project progresses, and some timelines will be established as well. So once we have a better idea of this, I'll provide an update to council at some point, probably not till next year. So council's aware of where this project is sitting and how it's going forward. One thing I will say is that the in the field data collection is the easiest part. Compared to the background research and analysis, it really takes a lot less time, but we will get there eventually. So in your report, I mentioned we're going to start in Bobcaygeon for this project. We're going to run a pilot in the summer. That's the intention. And there's a few reasons for that. One is it's been identified as a priority because it's one of our settlement areas. Two is because it's big enough that we can get a good data set, but small enough that it's doable within a smaller period of time. So it's not Lindsay, which will take a huge amount of time to complete. So we'll be able to test it out effectively because of the size. And we already have community members interested in working on it in the community. So we have a couple of Heritage Committee members who are from the Bobcaygeon area who have been working in the community to get people keen on the project. So we've got some community backup already. So we'll be ready to go in the spring. So that's really exciting, and that's where we will be starting come the spring. But we will get to everybody eventually. And hopefully there's no glitches when we do our run through Bobcaygeon, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. That's probably not what you want to hear, but yeah, we'll be looking for setting up some public meetings in the spring and getting going on the pilot. Next slide. All right, this is the last slide. This is just an overview of the relevant legislation and policy. I'm not going to run through this. Most of it's in the report as well. But this is very much supported by provincial and municipal legislation and policy. It's something that other municipalities have undertaken. It's been very effective for their planning programs, and hopefully it will be effective and helpful for us as well. All right, that is the end of the presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Emily. We certainly can't accuse you of sitting on the heritage file and doing nothing with it. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'll get a motion to receive, and we'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Elmsley and Dunn, are there any questions for Emily on the presentation? We have a report. Sorry? Councillor O'Reilly?
Just a brief one. Thanks for that presentation. It seems to me like evaluation will be a big part of it, as well as priorities as well, everything else in your work plan. It says in here you're going to do like a high-level evaluation. Like, could you just give me an idea of what that would kind of consist of, just simply?
Yeah, for sure. So under Ontario Regulation 906, that's the provincial criteria for determining cultural heritage value. There's 9 criteria under that, and they're basically yes or no criteria. So the evaluation we'll do is go through the 9 criteria, say, does it fulfill them? Yes, no, a brief statement why, and that's the high level evaluation. If we see the property has more significance and say might warrant designation after consultation with stakeholders and property owners, that sort of thing, we would do a more in-depth evaluation. But that high level one is just intended to say, does it check any of these criteria for significance? Yes, no, briefly why.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Yeo, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. I had a question. One of your slides mentioned natural heritage. So I've had, over the past few years, some people have issue when their neighbor takes down a towering 300-year-old white pine tree. Is that what you're talking about? Stuff like that? Because we have no tree bylaw, there's no protection for these trees that have been here longer than anybody. And so I wonder if that's the kind of stuff the natural heritage is looking at, century trees and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's looking at. So, those trees that were, planted by original settlers or predate original settlers, just so we have an idea of what exists, and then that may inform future policy or bylaw making, depending on what we find.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you. Through you to Emily. In our last meeting, we talked about areas of the city, for example, that the general area is deemed historical, but for example, the Old Mill District, but the actual Old Mill itself isn't deemed. Am I correct? Just sort of giving an example as to hopefully this framework will help designate those really important structures that never were designated and were maybe forgot about. I don't know why, but is that really, that's the whole aim of this framework, is it not, that we're going to be doing here?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the outcomes. So I'm sure that, like the Old Mill, there's some very significant structures in our communities that don't have any heritage protection right now. So the goal of the inventory is to identify those and provide a recommendation as to whether or not they should have some kind of protection. So before we went forward with that kind of protection, we would obviously it wouldn't just be, me saying, designate this building now. We would do more consultation on that, so we know what's important to our communities. But yes, that could be one of the outcomes for significant buildings that currently don't have heritage protection, like the Old Mill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion to receive. I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you, Emily. Stay with us. We got a couple of reports we'll just go through while you're here. 641 is the report that goes with the presentation. The motion in front of us that the report ED 2022-006 Heritage Inventory Framework be received, that the Heritage Inventory Framework as outlined in Appendix A be adopted, and that this recommendation be brought forward to Council for consideration at the next regular Council meeting. Councillor Ashmore, you're our rep. Will you move that on the Heritage? You'll move that. Thank you. Can I get a seconder? Councillor Yeo, thank you. Any further questions on the report? Call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Stay with us, Emily. We'll just do report 7.1 while we have you, which is a report. Do you want to give us a quick 2-minute overview just on the removal of property from the Heritage Register, 1824 County Road 46, Eldon Township? Let's deal with that report and then we'll take a quick break, but go ahead.
For sure. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. So this is an objection to to the listing of a property on the Heritage Register. So recent changes to the Ontario Heritage Act have allowed property owners to make formal objections to the listing of their property on the Heritage Register. So this is an objection that's coming through that process under the Act. So the property at 1824 County Road 46, it was listed by council in fall of 2021. And following the listing, we send out a notice to the property owners, letting them know that council has listed their property. In response to that, that correspondence that we sent out, the owner of this particular property formally objected to her property being listed on the register, as is allowed under the Act now. So we're bringing forward that objection. It's been reviewed by the Municipal Heritage Committee, and the committee's recommendation is that the property remain listed on the Heritage Register. So both the committee and the property owner have submitted correspondence outlining their particular stance on this property remaining listed on the register. Council is the decision-making body on listing, putting properties on the register, taking them off. So it's up to council to make the decision whether or not they would like to have that property retained on the Heritage Register or to remove it for the reasons outlined by the property owner.
Thanks, Emily. When we received this original report where there was a bunch of properties that were up for listing, were the owners of the property at that time not notified that this report was coming forward and they were going to be potentially listed? Because we did have several who at the time we removed as a result of their asking for it. I'm just wondering why this one, I mean, was that part of the process originally, or did they just find out after we approved that listing?
So what happens with our process is we send 2 notices to owners. So we send one before the report's received by council, so that everybody knows, so that everybody knows their property is being considered for listing. It allows them to ask it not be listed, or to reach out, ask questions. And then once the property is listed, we send a second notice to let the owners know that it has been listed, just so they know what council's decision is. Or for those properties that council chose not to list, back in October, we send a notice saying that council chose not to list it. So this was in response to the second notification. So I didn't receive any correspondence or inquiry from the owner of this particular property prior to council receiving the report. But the property owner did receive notification to alert to the fact that council was considering it. So I just received that correspondence after council had already listed the property. So I'm bringing it forward now.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dunn, you had a question? Go ahead.
I'll give you a motion, though, when you're ready.
Yeah, let's just see if there's any other questions first for Emily on the report, her overview. Councillor Vail, go ahead.
I would just ask, does the owner understand the difference between listing and designation? It's just when I read the report, it sounds like they're afraid that their property is being designated and not listed.
To be honest, I'm actually not sure. I've spoken to the property owner on the phone and went over the difference between designation and listing. So we have had that conversation. I'm not sure if the owner understands that it's listing as opposed to designating. I know in the correspondence that was received, it does say designated as opposed to listing, but I've spoken through it with the property owner in terms of what the difference is. So I'm actually not 100% sure.
Councillor Riley, you had a question?
Maybe through to Councillor Ashmore. Were you at the committee when this was discussed? Do you relay, was there something you'd add to why they felt as though it should stay on the property? Stay on the listing.
Yeah, thank you. It was basically the chair had looked over the history of not just the building itself, but the inhabitants who owned it. They put it on a listing, not a designation, and whereby if it's listed and you want to make some renovations, you have the right to do basic maintenance to your building, but what it does is will limit you to make expansions or major renovations to it. You have to, under the rules, you have to approach the committee or at least let them know what you're doing. So I wasn't a part of the preparation of it, but basically Emily here and the Athol Hart, they did most of the legwork here of getting the information, and it was their opinion that it was an historical building, not just the bricks and mortar, but the history behind it, that was their decision. I'm kind of 50-50 on it myself, but that's sort of what they did.
Any other questions? Councillor Seymour Fagan, do you have your hand up? Sorry? No? Okay. Councillor Dunn, you had a motion. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would move that report ED 2022-007, removal of a property from the Heritage Register, 1824 County Road 46 Eldon Township be received, and the subject property be removed from the listing on the Heritage Registry, and that the recommendations be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. And if I get a seconder, I'll explain my rationale.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Dunn. Second by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, people are very, very uncomfortable about government coming in and putting any kind of a recognition lien on their property. And when they take the time to object to that, because for the vast majority of people, this is their greatest wealth. This is where they put all their money, and this is what they're going to leave to their kids. And they don't want it encumbered. And I recognize by the current rules it's not going to be encumbered, but it's on the list. And 6 months, 8 months, 10 years down the road, a different government, different rule in the province might say, hey, we're going to put them all on that protected list. People are uncomfortable with that idea. If they have an opportunity to say no, go away. I caught myself there. Go away, leave me alone, and leave my property alone. So I support taking it off the list. If this gentleman and lady don't want their property on the register, they shouldn't have to.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour Fagan, you seconded it. Do you want to speak to it? No, not at this time. Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashmore, you had a question?
No, I would agree with, I would support the motion, even though I'm on the Heritage Committee. If somebody doesn't want it, well, then listen to them, and if they don't want it, then it's your obligation to listen to them and take it off the list. You can't force it on them, even though it was designated as historical, whether it's listed or designated or registered. If they don't want it, they don't want it, and I certainly don't believe in it being forced on them. They have various reasons why they're objecting to it, so I'm okay with that. You got to listen to them.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments regarding the report and the motion? Everybody's clear? It's a motion to remove it from the listing register. Remove it from the listing on the Heritage Register. I'll call the question then. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Emily, for all your help with those. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and deal with the rest of the reports. Let's come back at 3:15. It's 3:07 right now. councillors. Councillor Yeo and Seymour Fagan are back. Okay, thank you. 7.2 is a report on the 2022 municipal election update and related bylaws. I will turn it over to our city clerk, Kathy Ritchie, for a quick update. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council. This report is an update to Council and the public for the upcoming 2022 municipal election, providing timelines and restrictions to recommend a bylaw giving the Chief Administrative Officer delegated authority for restricted acts under the Municipal Act, passing a bylaw to adopt the updated election accessibility plan for 2022, and to give notice of a proposed amendment to the procedural bylaw, adjusting the date of the inaugural meeting in line with the new term of council commencing November 15th. So the Municipal Elections Act, along with other relevant legislation, sets out the regulations for conducting the municipal elections, including the duties of the clerk, the overarching principles of the Act according to case law, and the requirement to plan for electors and candidates with disabilities. So in 2018, the Municipal Elections Accessibility Report indicated that we were in full compliance and implemented and adhered to that plan. Also, the voting methods in 2018, the voting methods on January 28th, 2021, Council adopted bylaw 2021-002 to authorize the use of alternative voting methods and advance vote for the City of Kawartha Lakes. Excuse me. An RFP was issued and an evaluation team was established to acquire the Internet telephone voting service provider, comprising staff from the clerk's office, IT, and purchasing. The procurement process has commenced and is under the final stages of evaluation. As far as the election procedures, the clerk is to establish procedures and forms for election purposes, and if they are consistent with the principles of the Act, prevail over any other. The important timelines and restrictions. The most significant change to the Municipal Elections Act is the term of the new council commencing November 15th, 2022 until November 14th, 2026. Other key dates would be the nomination period, which is May 2nd, 8:30 a.m., ending nomination day, August 19th, 2 p.m. Nomination day, of course, is August 19th, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Campaign period restrictions for members of council in accordance with the use of corporate resources for election purposes policy is May 2nd to October 24th. The voters list will be available September 1st. Voters list revision period is September 1st to October 24th. Election voting period of 10 days from Friday, October 14th to Monday, October 24th. Election day, of course, is October 24th, ending at 8 p.m. The restricted acts after nomination day, which quite often you hear the term lame duck. So the Municipal Act provides that there are certain restrictions for actions after nomination day, which is August 19th. And if the new council will include less than 3/4 of the members of the outgoing council. And the basis for determination after nomination day but before voting day, the determination shall be based on the nominations to the new council that have been certified at any acclamations made of the new council, or after voting day, the determination shall be based on the declaration of results of the election, including declarations of election by acclamation. So those restrictions are actually stated in the Municipal Act, and it's the appointment or removal from office of any officer of the municipalities, the disposition of any real or personal property of the municipality, which has a value exceeding $50,000 at the time of disposal, and making any expenditures or incurring any other liability which exceeds $50,000. The delegation of council powers and duties policy currently gives the CAO delegated authority for the hiring and dismissal of an employee, which is one of the restrictions. And there are some exceptions. If it's included in the budget, the disposition or liability was included in the most recent budget adopted by council before nomination day, or under certain emergencies. So one of the other restrictions is in a municipal election year, starting on nomination day and ending on voting day, no request for inquiry shall be submitted to the IC, Integrity Commissioner, and the IC shall not report to the city about whether or not a member contravened the council code of conduct. So the delegated authority to Chief Administrative Officer, in the event that that Section 275 becomes relevant following nomination day on August 19th or voting day August 24th, a bylaw is to cover instances where current delegated authority does not exist. So part of the responsibilities of the delegated authority is that the CAO will provide a report to the new council, identifying all decisions that were made subject to the delegated authority period, which ends following the inaugural meeting of the new council. Similar to previous election years, a bylaw has been passed which gives the Chief Administrative Officer the authority beyond the current delegated authority. And so the election accessibility plan, this is mandatory, and an election accessibility plan shall be adopted by council prior to each election. Staff are not recommending notable changes to the election accessibility plan, and that plan has been attached as Appendix B to this report. So the final is the amend the procedural bylaw for the new term of council. As previously stated, the date of the new term of council is November 15th. Therefore, it was necessary to adjust the meeting schedule and the date of the inaugural meeting. The current provision in Section 302 of the procedural bylaw states that the inaugural meeting is to be held on the first Monday of the new term of council, which would be on Monday, November 21st, delaying the first regular council meeting to November 29th. It is recommended that the new council be sworn in on Tuesday, November 15th, is when their term begins, and holding the regular council meeting, the first regular council meeting, the following Tuesday. This would require an amendment to the procedural bylaw. This concludes my overview.
Thank you. It's pretty standard. There's nothing in there. We did a lot of that similar before the last election, except you're changing a few dates because that's changed, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So other than that, the delegation of authority, everything seemed pretty standard to me. So any questions for the clerk? There's a motion here. Councillor Ashmore.
Does the 15 less days make it difficult for a transition period? Normally, it's at least 7 weeks, like from third week of the end of October until the first part of December, when a new council goes through that transition process. Like, it seems like a very quick turnaround of 2 weeks. Does that give enough time for this to work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it was our intention to make sure that the new council was up and running as quickly as possible, and that there wasn't a delay in continuing the services of the city. So I'm hoping that the orientation, some of that rollout will happen, and council will be ready to go.
But this moving of the date wasn't our choice. This was...
No, this was the municipal act.
Yeah.
We didn't have a choice about the November 15th term of office.
Okay, thanks. Second question is, how do we give confidence back into the people when we had a computer crash And will we be using the Dominion voting system? And will people have confidence in the system whereby I know it's always the last day and it's just human nature. I mean, most people vote on that day, but we had a computer issue, really big data issue, and we had a computer, I guess, freeze or crash, whatever you want to call it. We had to extend it for a day. Do you foresee that? If it does happen, or has the provider, in our case, Dominion Voting, have they said that they're going to be preventing this from happening again?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Dominion is not going to be the service provider. They did not submit a proposal. And also, it wasn't actually a computer crash that created the situation or the delay. It was actually the connectivity. So it was a third-party vendor. That's the reason for the crash. But certainly when we've done our interviews with potential vendors who are well aware of the 2018 issue, that would not have happened, and they will make sure that it won't happen.
Okay, so has there been a vendor chosen to do the election?
So we have shortlisted and we're evaluating right now, and the last verification, even though that we've gone through the whole reference process of other municipalities, is the insurance.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you're good? Any other questions on the report? Looking for a motion as printed. Councillor Dunn, second by Councillor Elmsley. I was going to call you Councillor Yo, but he's up there. Seconded by Councillor Elmsley. Any further questions or comments on the report? Councillor Ashmore?
Yeah, it was my final question I was going to ask. During the last election, well, I had another question, but I don't know if I'm going to be allowed to ask it, but I have two questions, if I could. 99% of people have a phone, most of the case, but not everybody has internet. And a lot of people want the option of piece of paper. There's nothing wrong with that, with voting by paper.
That's not part of this report, Councillor.
Okay,
That's
but I'm
not
just
part of this
asking about
report. We
the
already made a
options.
decision as council to proceed with the electronic voting. We did that a year ago.
Okay, and so my question is about the scrutineers. Can I ask that? Last time, scrutineers were locked out. They were for all the candidates. They were locked out of the room. Didn't seem fair. Is that going to be happening this year, or is that hopefully not? But that was very important that people asked about the scrutineers, because that's transparency. Will the scrutineers for each candidate, whether they be mayoral or councillor or school board trustee, be allowed to go up in that room?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So this was election night that you're referring to. So that will be incorporated into one of our procedures. Because it was our first time with the internet telephone, we're not exactly sure what the report was going to look like. So that's something that we would change probably for the 2022 election.
I think you have to keep in mind as well, when we did the ballots where they're fed through the machine, the scrutineers were there to sort of watch over if there's any disputed ballot. When we do electronic and phone, you're going to invite the scrutineers in the room, you're going to push a button and your results are going to come out. So I think it changes the role and the need for scrutineers. There's not much oversight there. It's, don't agree, so push the button again. I mean, there's really not a whole lot of, that's, one of the things with the electronic voting, you don't have that paper trail, right? So I'm not sure the role of a scrutineer is the same. But did you have a follow-up question, or was that it?
Just, I guess the hesitation of some voters is that, I know it's all electronic and that's the way things are now, but, there's always the question about, like, where is the server? The server, obviously, it's all around the world. We don't know where these servers are. So, I mean, it is what it is, but I mean, I hate to say it that way, but I mean, it's just, you want to have full confidence. People want to have full confidence in the system, whether you win or lose. I mean, that's what it's all about, that they have confidence in the system, that it's going to be fair. That's fine.
Thank you. Any other questions on the report? Motion as printed. Call the question. All in favor? and that's passed. Thank you. Okay, let's go to 7.3. Thank you, Madam Clerk. I think assuring business continuity for network operations. I'm not, Jennifer Stover's joining us. Hello, Jennifer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Letham. So the purpose of this report is to provide council with an update on the work that's been undertaken and continues to be explored since our IT system failure that we had on September 20th of 2021. The event of September 20th was the result of water infiltrating through the roof and into the city's server room. As you know, water and electrical equipment don't mix, and that water damage caused the failure of a large number of our systems and applications. So good news, the city did have in place a disaster recovery plan and a business continuity plan that were in place for events similar to this. The event on September 20th was our first opportunity to test that plan. And the lessons that we learned have provided us with some valuable insights, and we'll be looking at that as an opportunity for improvement. And we're just going to discuss that in this report. So the disaster recovery plan we developed in 2018, it identified the need for a secondary network operations center or a backup center. We had that included in the 2019 capital budget as a multi-year project for $300,000. And the initial idea was to have that installed at 68 Lindsay Street because it was under construction at the time. For a few reasons, that never happened. We didn't get to actually build that site there. And so in 2021, when we went to revisit that, get new quotes to have that secondary center installed at 68 Lindsay Street, the cost had escalated from $300,000 to in excess of $850,000. So at that point, staff took a pause. We wanted to revisit it, determine if there was a better solution. And one of the reasons for that is that a key component of a secondary network operations center is you want to have it as far away as possible from your primary site. So as far away as possible from City Hall. And obviously 68 Lindsay Street's in fairly close proximity. So we have been looking at other city sites to determine if they would be a feasible secondary network operations center. We've also been in conversation with a neighboring municipality to see if we could put our secondary network operation on site at their building, and in turn, we could host their secondary site if that worked for them. So we're still exploring that, and we'll report back to council. In addition to that, we're also in the process of developing a cloud strategy. This is a little more complex, so it's not something we could do immediately. So we do want to put that secondary physical site somewhere, knowing that at some point we'll be able to move on to the cloud. So while we're exploring sort of the best option for a secondary network, we've also done some work immediately to prevent a similar incident from happening. We've rerouted the plumbing away from our current network operations center so that there hopefully will not be water damage in future. We're in the process of looking at relocating the sprinkler system. I think that'll be done as part of the City Hall works. And then additionally, we're building some redundancy into our system to ensure that if one piece of infrastructure fails, that we've got a backup piece of infrastructure ready to go and we're not having to wait for that one to be fixed. So that's just a high level summary of the event and the work that's been undertaken by our IT department and by building and property and continues to be happening. So with that, be happy to try and answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you. The report, the recommended motion that report be received and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Why don't I get a motion for that, and then we'll see if there's any questions for Jennifer. Deputy Mayor Richardson, second by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Any questions for Jennifer? And I know Carrie's on the line as well if we've got a technical question that Jennifer can't answer. So any questions? Councillor Helmsley, go ahead.
Just a question about the motion. If we're just receiving it, there's no recommendation.
It's just an update for you at this point till they figure out the best option to go forward, and then I'm sure it'll come forward to council at that time. They just
Okay.
know there was a lot of councillors curious as to what happened and why, and they're just, I think, trying to keep us up to date at this point.
Exactly, and, you know, I'll be interested in seeing the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Jennifer or Councillor Seymour Fagan? Did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you,
okay.
yes.
I'm just okay, perfect. I'm just wondering what happened, why it wasn't done at 68 Lindsay Street originally for the much less cost. I'm just wondering what happened there.
So we got the budget approved in 2019, and it was going to delay the occupancy of the rest of the building if we went ahead with it at that point in time. And so the decision was that we would let occupancy happen, then we would go in and do the secondary system. Then COVID hit, so most of our capital projects got delayed. And so then in 2021 was our time frame to actually proceed with it. And then costs had just escalated through the roof.
Okay, thank you. And was the occupancy of the housing or was it our corporate services area? Which was the occupancy that you're talking about?
Good question. I believe it was the occupancy of the city admin side.
Okay, we're good with that. Thank you. Any other questions on receiving the report? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go down to 7.4 is public art acquisition by donation, the Fenelon Falls marquee sign. Donna Goodwin is going to join us, I believe. There you are. Hello, Donna. Welcome. Do you want to give us a quick overview? Want to give us a quick overview on your report? Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, Council. So before you is a report regarding the Fenelon Falls Theatre Marquee and its acquisition into our public art inventory. So in April 2021, the Economic Development Division was contacted by members of the Marquee Committee to see if they could donate the marquee to the city. And based on that initial conversation, staff felt that the request had merit under the city's public art policy and informed the committee that they could submit a formal request to donate the piece. So in May 2021, the Fenelon Theatre Marquee Committee submitted a formal request to donate the marquee sign to the city of Kawartha Lakes, and that's attached in Appendix A in the report before you. So as the request was being reviewed, though, it became clear that a number of departments would be impacted by the donation. And the 2018 public art policy didn't have a mechanism for this sort of interdepartmental sign-off. So the policy was revised in August of 2021 to establish an interdepartmental mechanism known as the Public Art Technical Team, or PAT for short. And it's an ad hoc team that's sort of assembled for requests such as this. So it was managed by the Economic Development Division and staff from corporate assets, realty services, insurance risk, building and properties, and building and septic sort of encompass the PAT. And we worked together to ensure that the request was assessed and the requirements and needs of all affected departments were kept in mind. So staff are recommending the acquisition by donation of the Fenelon Falls Theatre Marquee sign, and it's based on the selection criteria that's found in the public art policy. So the first one is quality and authenticity of the work, and it is found that the appraisal indicates that the refurbishment reflects the craftsmanship of its time. B is condition of work, and the materials are in excellent condition and through that refurbishment back in 2015. Artistic merit and appropriate ethical content. So it's a great example of a populist blade art signage at the advent of that Technicolor film industry. D is durability, safety, and maintenance costs. So like life cycle costs and annual operating costs, not of the artistic work for the display in this public space. And through the sign permit process, it was verified that engineering sign-off was achieved back in 2015 and that it's safe for display in a public space. E is relevance to the city's natural and built environment or cultural heritage. And the sign is found to be relevant to the cultural heritage of the city and Fenelon Falls in particular. And F, ethical or legal considerations regarding ownership and installation. And there are no considerations or constraints, and ownership has been validated by the applicant. So found to be eligible for these reasons, staff initiated a final step in the evaluation process and secured an independent appraisal of the marquee and its base. The appraiser revealed that the value exceeded the $50,000 threshold for staff approval. Thus, staff are bringing forward the acquisition by donation of the Fenelon Falls marquee before committee poll today.
Thank you, Donna. Appreciate that. Great looking sign and a great location in Fenelon Falls. Seems like an easy decision to me, but what is council's wish? Any questions? Councillor Elmsley?
No, I was going to give you a motion as printed.
I'll take a motion as printed that the report be received, that council approve the acquisition by donation of the Fenelon marquee sign from the Fenelon Theatre Marquee Committee and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the acquisition agreement to be in a form satisfactory to the solicitor, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor Yeo. Thank you. Any questions for Donna on the report? Call the question then. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
Okay, 7.5 is our very own Rebecca Mustard, who we haven't seen in a while. 2021 Kawartha Lakes Business Count. Welcome, Rebecca. Good to see you again. Go ahead with your overview, and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So in this past summer, we conducted our very first ever business count project. And business count projects are conducted in many larger regional municipalities to gather in-depth street-level information on local businesses and employment trends. And the information is then used to inform programming and policies such as growth management strategies and the municipal comprehensive review of official plans. So the business counts are door-to-door surveys of businesses and employment properties, and they ask questions about business activity, locations, employment, and future plans. And our first survey was focused specifically on downtowns and industrial areas. It was conducted by our summer student team, and they were joined by summer students from our local chambers of commerce who surveyed within their own communities. The data was gathered for 3 weeks in August. It was analysed and it's presented to you as Appendix A to this report in the form of the 2021 Kawartha Lakes Business Count Insight Report. So you'll see the report is organised into 4 sections, and each section includes analysis on the business activity, location, employment and future plans of the 262 responding businesses. The first section contains all the surveys from across Kawartha Lakes, and then the following 3 sections are subsections of data in 3 communities where we had enough responses to aggregate the data and split it out and still maintain confidentiality. And these communities are Bob Cajun, Fenelon Falls, and Lindsay. So this first survey was really successful in validating the methodology of the survey and setting us up for future years. We had really fruitful partnerships with our local chambers. So we're going to do the survey again. We're scheduled to do it this summer in 2022. We'll be supported again by our summer student team. And we're planning to start in the same geography as we did in 2021 to further fill out that information. And then this year, and then hopefully in subsequent years, our aim is to slowly expand the geography that we're covering within the survey to maintain the data integrity, but also capture a greater number of businesses to be more representative of what's going on in Kawartha Lakes, in our businesses and our employment properties. And that's a very brief overview of the report.
Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate that. Always important information for our community. The motion is that the Business Lakes Count report be received. that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Mover and a seconder, Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor O'Reilly. Are there any questions on the report for Rebecca? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go down to 7.6, which is 2021 Lindsay Ops Landfill Gas Generator Summary. Again, just an update report. I believe Director Robinson, there he is going to give us an update. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, just providing a really brief update. I know it's been a long afternoon so far. The update on the generator report is pretty well status quo. The generator is running at a cost neutral performance right now. As the landfill continues to age and expands with more waste, and we're able to generate more gas out of the landfill, we're anticipating the generator performance to continue to improve. So staff are recommending a receive only rate now and to continue status quo operation of the generator at the landfill.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple quick ones. I'm assuming cost neutral means that it's operating at the same cost as it would be if we were buying hydro direct from Hydro One?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, just to provide some clarity, I guess the value of the electricity generated from the landfill generator is equivalent to the cost of operation and maintenance. So it is effectively a cost neutral operation at this time.
Okay, thank you. And the hydro generated is consumed by water, wastewater, et cetera. So my next question is, are the water, wastewater users, are they paying more or less of the same price as everybody else is paying? And I'll kind of back the question up. I don't want the water, wastewater people to be paying more for hydro than they could if they were buying it off the market.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So at this time, we're divvying the cost of the generator up in accordance with council's direction. There was a report that was, I think, several years ago now that identified that the wastewater treatment plant uses the highest portion, I believe in the upper 90s of the overall electricity generated. The landfill itself uses a minor portion. So the costs are divvied up in that manner. And I don't believe, as of right now anyways, the costs to the user rate are exorbitant above where the normal costs are. As I said, the costs are running at a neutral state right now.
I think I'm where I want to be. It's just that water, wastewater is paid for by a smaller group of people, approximately 4,900 people, I think I was told, in that neighborhood. Whereas the landfill site, for example, the cost of hydro at the landfill site is paid by the general population through their taxes. So my concern is that I don't want the people that are accessing water, wastewater services to be paying more for hydro than the people that are using the dump. And if you can tell me comfortably that you're saying they're not, then I'm good. I don't need numbers. I just need that assurance that they're not paying more than the general population.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, and I can confirm that. If the cost of the operation and running of the landfill generator was significantly higher than the generation, then the user rate would be paying more than it would normally on hydro costs. Because we're running at a cost neutral right now, the cost of the user rate is effectively equivalent to what they would be paying if they were buying off the grid.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions for Brian? By the way, last time I called it a dump, I got in trouble. It's a landfill site, so I got told that the last time, so I just wanted to clarify. Any other questions for Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Brian on the landfill generator report? The motion here is that the 2021 Lindsay Ops landfill gas generator summary be received, that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Need a mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor Richardson, second by Councillor Vale. Any last minute questions? All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move right down to memorandums. I assume you're going to stick with us, Director, in case we have any questions on drainage. There's a couple memorandums from Councillor Ashmore, so I'll turn the first one, 8.1, over to you, Councillor Ashmore. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This first one is just a general maintenance. This area on off of Highway 36 is a very flat area, basically zero slope anywhere. And we need to get, there's a few houses that are flooded, not almost flooded, or getting to the point. If we have quite a bit of snow this year, and our usual spring melt, we're going to have more flooding, which is just natural. But we need to get our ditches. We're not talking about a major clean out, just 4 to 6 inches, just with a smooth bucket, just to get the water flowing. That's all we need to do here. So it's not going to be very expensive at all, and I'm sure it could be fit into the budget that we already have.
Director, I just have a quick question for you. Are you there, Brian? Yeah. Director, is my understanding from following up that this is a private drainage issue, that the water that's coming is coming across the field and not from the roads, which obviously doesn't make it an issue for us regarding ditches. Can you confirm, and that the resident who had originally raised this knows that and has confirmed, and that this will be, I want to make sure we're not funding or asking staff to do work on a private issue. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, or to you, Mr. Mayor, through the council, that is correct. The issue has been, the staff have been aware of the issue since 2012, since the development of the home. The drainage is coming across the farm field from behind the property, and really doesn't have an effective outlet. The property, when developed, the road and the property was raised, creating that bit of a ponding issue on the private property. The road ditches itself, again, are there for facilitation of road drainage, drainage off of the road. They are working as indicated and as needed to facilitate drainage of the road. So this is a private drainage matter. Staff have had multiple conversations and made the resident aware, and in fact, the resident agreed that the drainage issue is coming from private property and not the road. So, we're going to continue to have some conversations with the resident and hopefully provide them some guidance to help support their private drainage issue. But the construction or modification of municipal drainage to facilitate this is not needed from a municipal perspective.
Thank you. I just wanted that background. Obviously can't support your memo based on that information, but go ahead.
Well, everything that was said was incorrect. Unfortunately, it's the ditch itself that needs to be done. There's no tile drainage outlet going into the ditch here, and there's a field that the water goes in. Our ditches are not working. It's period. They're not working. They're plugged. They're flat. So to say that it's a private issue, it's not. It's nothing to do with private. It just needs maintenance. It's our responsibility, 100%. And I can't see how this would be anything to do with a private. It's nothing to do with private landowners. It's our responsibility as a corporation to maintain our ditches. And I'm not sure, maybe he's looking at a different location, but this is not correct what was just said a few minutes ago.
Director, do you want to respond to that? I don't want to get into a he said, she said type of thing, but just want to make sure we've got the right information. Go ahead.
I can confirm, thank you, Mr. Mayor, that we are talking about the same location. Again, the drainage concern that's been created in the area is the drainage coming across the farmland through that property. It used to be able to make its way through there before the property was developed. Now that the property has been raised and modified, it's created that low point and hence the drainage issue. Again, the road itself is facilitating drainage from the road and is not creating any municipal concerns whatsoever. The ponding that's happening is happening on private property, resulting from the drainage from the farm field, not from the road allowance. So again, a difference of opinion, however you want to interpret it, but the road itself is acting as needed, and there's no operational concerns from the road itself. It is a private drainage matter between the farm property and the resident that owns the property on 36.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question about ditches. Are ditches there to drain lands, or are ditches there to protect the roads?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, municipal roadside ditches are primarily there to drain the roads and the road allowance. Again, where municipality or where area drainage through water courses or whatever join into municipal ditches, that's a different situation, different scenario, but primarily roads themselves are and ditches are there to facilitate drainage of roads and road allowances, not private drainage. Private drainage is the responsibility of the property owner.
Thank you. Any other questions regarding the memo? Councillor Ashmore, what is your wish?
Yeah, I can't believe what I'm hearing here. I invite anybody to come and look at it. We can't now because it's full of snow, but I mean, this is not a private matter. This is our responsibility. It's flat. The ditches need to be maintained. They need to be cleaned, and it's just a simple clean out. It's not a private matter that started this whole thing. It's just our responsibility. The water can't get away. It's just not, it's supposed to.
Water can't get away from the road?
No, it can't, the ditch is not functioning. And we're trying to lay the blame on the property owners. It's not their fault. We have the responsibility to keep our ditches functioning. It's not functioning, plain simple. I mean, I don't know, I don't understand why it's
So
not.
what's your motion? It's your memo, so.
Well, I would like to have staff.
You want to move it as?
Staff look at it or even consider it. I mean, obviously now we can't, well, we did, the supervisor did, but he's been there once, but I think we should revisit it in the spring. Middle of April would be perfect time to look at it and just to see exactly what the situation is there.
Okay, I need a motion. Your memo says something very different than what you're suggesting, so I need a motion.
Well, a motion, I would just condense it down to meeting public works staff in April there. I could start at that, just to start, to show them what is actually not happening there. I just need to get another set of eyes there besides mine and a few other ones, just to verify that this isn't started from a private owner. It's our responsibility as our
Okay, so
to do the
so
ditches,
you're let me just try to help here. So you're suggesting that the memo be received and that staff be directed to meet with the local councillor in the spring of 2022 to just figure out if anything needs to be done with this part of the drain. Is that?
That'd be fine.
And that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next meeting?
That's good, thanks.
That's what you're moving? Okay. Anybody want to second that? Councillor Yeo will second that. Thank you. We've sort of spoken to it. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. I'll second that motion. Because regardless of where the water is coming from, and I don't want to get into a whole argument about where the water is coming from, but regardless where the water is coming from, I'd like to be there for the meeting as well, because if there's water lying in a ditch, if the water in the ditch isn't running anywhere, there's a problem with the ditch. So I'd like to see this myself. I was going to suggest just a motion to defer this memo until after a meeting, but this works as well, I guess, because I'd like to be invited to that meeting just to see why one person saying a ditch isn't working, regardless of where the water's coming from. So I got to see this for myself before I make a decision. Thank you.
Well, if this motion passes, the local councillor, when there's a date set, he can let you know and maybe let all the council know for anybody that's interested. So everybody's clear on the motion? I'm going to call the question then. All in favor? I need hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion passes. Thank you. 8.2 is another motion regarding Cedar Glen Culvert and ditching. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
I talked to engineering, and what they're going to do is, prior to doing the resurfacing, they're just going to do a quick check of all the drainage in the culvert. So we're fine here. Actually, it's really not necessary, but I could pass it if we like. But apparently, it's in it's in the plan to do this, so.
Yeah,
anyway.
and you're right, and I spoke with staff, and it's going to be inspected, it's going to be prioritized as part of the work program in 2022, and when we resurface a road, the ditches are always looked at beforehand, so I don't, rather than directing staff, are you comfortable we just received the memo? You know it's going to be done anyways?
That's fine.
Okay, memo will be received. Seconder, Councillor Dunn, thank you. Any questions, comments on receiving? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. And I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Yeo will move a motion to adjourn. Councillor Seymour Fagan will second it. Any questions or comments? All in favor? That passes. We are adjourned. Thank you, folks, and we will see you on February 22nd.